So thank you guys who came out to that networking event last night. Some really good conversations going on. We appreciate you taking the time to chat with each other, except the RMAC folks who had to call out like 3 times. We're all just standing in a circle with each other. Like, don't you guys work in cubes right next to each other? So yeah, you got to give those guys a hard time. Anyway, we just like to say thanks again to the vendors who were there last night. We're going to hear from a couple of them today. Also, thank you to our sponsors. Again, on the back of your pamphlet, the Center of Excellence and obviously the folks in this room, none of us, paid a dime for that event. And so, again, we're really grateful for the community that we're in and the way that they support us. Would also like to give a shout out to Colorado Mountain College here. We're, again, putting this event on for not very much money. They've donated this space to us, and they've been sort of running around whatever we need, helping us out. So if you guys see folks with those Colorado Mountain College tags on, help us thank them this morning. All right, well, we have a great day of presentations today. We have a roundtable discussion scheduled for this afternoon to sort of figure out what we've learned in the last 2 days and where we should be going. But first, we're going to start with Brad Kekritz from the Department of Interior. He was our last presenter yesterday, and we sort of ran out of time to ask him questions. So, Brad, if you want to come up, and if you folks had all night to think of pressing questions for Brad, so let's challenge him. All right, thanks.
Well, we had a little bit of discussion over dinner last night with a few folks, but Rico, I'm looking at you.
Hey, Brad.
Yeah.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Dave Tolley. I just want to say, roaming around at the event last night, I know there was a lot of kudos going out for a number of things on this program, and particularly a lot of folks mentioned how much they enjoyed the presentation, so good job.
Thank you.
I'm just kind of curious, as you talk about some of the next steps with your program, where do you see that going in terms of having opportunities to do more integration with other airborne assets that might be on an incident?
So I think what we'll see is some increased complexity over time. We're still some distance away from being able to fully integrate on a really active incident. So one of the things we were talking about is separation. So, crawl, walk, run, it makes the most sense to start in places that are very remote, or we're reducing our probability of any sort of an incursion from the public. We're reducing the number of our own aircraft in the TFR, at least initially. I think, certainly within 5 years, I think we'll be seeing more routine operations of UAS for wildfire, but a lot of requirements have to be defined before we're ready to do that, to make sure that we're actually producing something useful versus just putting another aircraft in the sky.
Anybody else?
Oh, come on, that's easy.
I was just curious. You guys are building a fleet of vehicles,
Yep.
correct?
Yep.
And you guys are actually building a program there at DOI. Are you looking at short-term, long-term, some sort of capabilities to deploy, I guess what I would call, for lack of a better description, little teams that
Yep.
go out with your assets?
Yep, absolutely.
Go out
So
and tie in with some of these teams and be there to perform the critical functions?
Yep. So we're trying to a couple of different things. We have fleet in-house aircraft that we're purchasing. So we put out a solicitation last year for 5 different aircraft ranging in size between 0 and 55 pounds, and had a bunch of different payload specifications for those aircraft that really drove how we broke those into different categories. We kind of typed them like we do our aircraft for fire. And so we awarded contracts for 3 of those aircraft, and we're going to actually go out with some more solicitations to try and hone in on a little bit different kind of vehicle for one of the specs. So we are putting together a group of fire folks who are qualified aviation managers, ATGS, helicopter folks, to try and go out, at least initially, to the prescribed fire world and really try and hone our skills on how we use the assets in that environment before we moved on to a wildfire. So, you know, we all know wildfires are a terrible place to do experiments, especially at going fire. But if we have fire use is a good opportunity. You know, if you have a fire use fire that's got, I think that's a term we're using still, I don't know, it changes, but yeah, long duration fire that's maybe being managed, there's a good opportunity to use that as a testing ground and to refine those skills. So we're doing both our in-house fleet, which is the small hand launch vehicles, and then we'll do contract services. Ultimately, if funding became available, I think the best case scenario is to get some exclusive use contracts, a couple out there where we can move the aircraft, you know, in a module from fire to fire to really utilize them fully and refine all those workflows. But again, it's an evolution and costs money. Yeah.
On that, talk really close. On that question of cost, do you have any projection for what it actually costs per hour to operate one of these?
We have an RFI out back to the industry. So the initial RFI we did last year was not, so it wasn't a request for proposal. It was just, do you have a vehicle? Will you be willing to bring it out? And we currently have an RFI out to the industry to try and give us a rough order of magnitude, but I don't have those numbers back yet. I think you're likely to see for a Scan Eagle class of aircraft, it's not going to be a dissimilar cost to what it would cost to put a light fixed wing aircraft. The small hand launch ones are you're talking about a $25,000 system, so your acquisition costs are pretty low, and then you got the time of the government employees. So for those types of missions, 2-3 people, plus there's not really with UAS, there's not a direct operating cost like fuel and oil. You just charge the batteries for an electric system, or you put a little bit of gas in it for a fuel-powered system. Hi, Rico.
Hey, Brad. Hey, just one thing. I think the integration of that of your vehicles here would be great in an incident management system, such as a team, working with FEMA, working with our incident management teams and wildfires. How far have you gotten? That's the question. How far have you gotten there?
Pretty good. Well, last year it was. I wouldn't say it was great integration in terms of being able to provide the product. So, the big challenge we had last year was getting the vehicle in place, working it in the environment to see if we could do that to get the data back down to the ICP. We learned a lot about where we need to position the asset relative to ICP, how we're going to do the communication infrastructure to move that data from the vehicle back to fire camp. In terms of the operation, it was highly integrated with ATGS's, the helibase. Everybody was briefed and eyeball to eyeball with the operators, like we talked about a little bit last night. And so the strategy for moving forward is to really try and co-locate that ground control station, or at least the data receptacle for the information from the vehicle at ICP. And we worked with FireWhat, which is a company I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. They were pretty integrated with one of the vendors that we had. And we're actually ingesting the data right there in fire camp, and we're able to do a little bit. Again, like I spoke to yesterday, we had some radio frequency challenges there as far as getting the information back to the trailer. But all that stuff's overcomable, and I think eventually what we'll see is some sort of a data link that's taken that feed into ICP directly, and then you can set up whatever, depending on what kind of data you're collecting, you can set up a video screen in an ops tent where an ops chief could ask them to task the sensor to look at whatever division they want, and then you could have a GIS component with that. So really the key is to get the data into where the people can manipulate it and then disseminate it. And one of the things we did last year with the live full motion video was took it and who's familiar? You guys familiar with the Fire Enterprise Geospatial Portal? Anybody? So it's a GIS or a fire information system that allows people with credentials, password, to get in and look at all this incident data from across the country. And we were able to actually plug that video feed into that portal, so anybody that needs to see that information can see it, but it's behind a firewall. So work in progress.
Thanks, Brad. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Any other questions? Hey, Paul Lindsay, you over there, Paul? I'm looking for you. Okay, sorry. Hey, I might just bounce one off of the Forest Service guys here real quick, Paul, if you don't mind. I know Forest Service is starting to ramp up some of their efforts with unmanned aerial systems, correct? Where do you guys see that going, Mr. Lindsay? What's sort of on your radar there in terms of what you guys are going to be working on? Do you mind taking a question on that?
No, that's a good question. To be honest, in the fire arena, our best path forward is tying in with OAS and Interior. They're leading the charge on that end. Where we're focusing right now is with the other users in the National Forest System. There are a lot of issues with special use permits, people using UAVs on ski areas, in wilderness, campgrounds, those kind of places where there's privacy, security issues, overflying National Forest System land without a special use permit. So we've got an executive steering committee that's working on those issues and just trying to tie in our advisory group with what Brad's agency is doing and let them lead the way on that part of it.
And Dave, just to add on to what Paul said, keep in mind we do have a group chartered under the NWCG to work the integration issues, and all of that is interagency. So Forest Service, DOI, and the state representative from the NASF is on there as well. So it's pretty highly interagency what we're working on now.
Hey, Brad, Tom Cook with Forest Service.
Yeah, hi, Tom.
I was just wondering if on your briefing yesterday, a lot of it, other than the KMAX, was more like a fixed wing type mission. Have you guys looked into more in the helicopter side, vertical lift type stuff, other than the KMAX?
Yeah, absolutely. So good point, Tom. So the reason that we're talking about the KMAX predominantly is that there is no other vehicle that is at the readiness level in terms of a Type 1 VTOL, which is what our RFP was originally. The Sikorsky has the Blackhawk. Some of you may have seen that they have an unmanned Blackhawk or optionally piloted Blackhawk. It's not, at their own admission when they responded to the RFP, or the RFI rather, not nearly at the readiness level. They weren't equipped to do the tasks that we asked in that RFI, which was to deliver cargo and water. So there really was only one response, and that was the Command Lockheed response for a Type 1 VTOL to do the kind of missions that we do with Type 1 helicopters. So there isn't, from a Type 1 standpoint, there is not another vehicle that's the same or even close really to that. For smaller stuff, we are beginning, there's been some interest across the board at looking at things like aerial ignition as a mission that we could potentially replace a manned aircraft with an unmanned system, especially a small scale burn where you just want to get out there and drop a little bit of a few PSD type balls. That's a project we're going to be taking on in the next year or so to start evaluating that. So that would probably bring the vehicle size down to something much smaller. Doesn't have to be very big to carry something that weighs, maybe 100, 150 pounds. You'd probably be looking at a vehicle there that's maybe 1,000 pounds or something like that.
Any other questions for Brad? All right, seeing none, thank you very much, you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, we really appreciate it.
All right, and I think that's actually a great transition to our next presentation. Quick show of hands, who thinks we should be using unmanned systems on wildland fires here in Colorado? Who thinks we should not be using unmanned systems on wildland fires here in Colorado? The rest of you just don't care. Cool. And that, I don't know. That, I know it's not raw data. Kim can't use that and go, run it through the machine. But it's just interesting to know where people think we are. A lot of firefighters are sort of wary of the unmanned systems because you have those hobbyists flying them. and they don't understand the technologies that Brad's presented today. They just see them as sort of a nuisance. So one of the challenges we find as the Center of Excellence that we're going to have to overcome in the firefighting community is doing a test case showing folks what the utility of those systems are, if they're used correctly, if they're used by the right trained operators. So that's my aside. With that, this morning we have Njord Rhoda, who's local, sort of, to the area, but he's going to be presenting on the unmanned KMAX and night aerial firefighting operations. So come on up.
Right here? And then we're good to go. All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Njord Rhoda. I'm the Director of Operations for RAVCO. We're a local Colorado helicopter company. For those that are not familiar, we do firefighting. We also run a high-altitude flight school over in Leadville. We're mostly directed at institutional customers, folks like foreign military. We train the FBI, law enforcement, EMS. And what's germane to this conference is we're the only program in the world that does a night vision program, and that includes our friends over at the Army US HATS program. But you have any questions, come talk to me about that after this. But what we're going to talk about today is the KMAX and how this can be a commercial system. My personal involvement with this program is I used to be the chief test pilot for this program for Lockheed Martin before I was with RAVCO full-time. KMAX is actually kind of a story that's been evolving over time. Command Aerospace has been working on an unmanned system probably 20 years now, but really ramped up in the last couple years. The history is we had a lot of challenges in Afghanistan. For those that are not familiar, back in the heyday, 2006, 2007, 2008, we had killed most of the bad guys that are dumb, and we left only the smart guys. And they figured out that the U.S. Army, the Marines, the Air Force, we have a huge logistical tail. In the 2007, 2008, 2009 timeframe, we had over 100,000 soldiers, airmen, Marines, scattered over 100 forward operating bases through a very rugged country. And those forward operating bases had a huge logistical tail. It took a lot of beans, bullets, and beer to keep these guys fed, armed, and ready to do their combat mission. And what a lot of folks don't realize is Afghanistan is a very difficult and challenging environment to operate. The roads are poor, a lot of bad guys, and believe it or not, the military doesn't have an unlimited supply of helicopters, particularly the CH-47 Chinook, which at the time was the only aircraft that really was able to perform in a hot and high altitude environment. You know, a lot of people don't realize that we only, at the height of the war, only had 30 of these aircraft out there. And of those 30, maybe only 20 were ever operationally. So you have 20 Chinooks to support combat operations, evacuating injured personnel, doing all the things that you had to do in combat. So in order to keep all these forward operating bases supplied across the country, we had to rely on convoys. And since we killed all the bad guys that are dumb out there, the smart guys figured out pretty quickly that the way to shut down the military and our operations was to blow up these convoys. And they looked at their Taliban or their Al-Qaeda buddies over in Iraq, how they're impacting our operations. And they figured out pretty quickly that IEDs are a quick, inexpensive way to degrade our effectiveness in combat. So we had a very unique challenge from a military perspective over there. How do we keep these folks resupplied with all the things that they need, the pallets of water, the cases of ammunition, mail, lots of stuff that you know, you never really think about or see in the movies, but are just absolutely vital. So the Marine Corps decided, hey, we need to get these kids off the road. We need to get our young airmen, our young Marines, our young soldiers that are being blown up, driving a pallet of water across bad guy country. So the Navy decided to let's take a look at some of the technologies that are out there. And Command and Lockheed were already starting to develop an unmanned aerial system that can move cargo. And they initiated a program that able to perform what we call the 3Ds, dumb, dirty, and dangerous. And that's what cargo really is. It's dumb. If you lose an aircraft, no big deal. We lost a helicopter. Lockheed and Command, they'd love to make more, but we didn't lose any American lives. So that's kind of the genesis of the unmanned KMAX. And what we're going to talk about today is how this thing's evolved and how we can apply this to aerial firefighting. So real quick, we'll start off with a quick video, kind of introduce you guys to the aircraft, some of the capabilities. We'll talk about how it's applicable to the firefighting scenario and night firefighting in particular. We'll talk a little bit about the aircraft, the capabilities, why this machine's unique. We'll take a look at a couple more videos and we'll wrap it up with some questions. Let's see if we can get this video to play. Any help? Whoops. How do we get that thing to go? We got sound?
Yeah.
So this is out in Yuma Proving Grounds where we initially developed the aircraft.
During our first deployment, we got up to a tempo of running 6 missions a night. I think we were over 33,000 pounds a night.
At 4:07 this morning, we formally announced that we are restarting production of our commercial KMAX production lines.
All right, so yeah, really quick video that shows the capability of the aircraft. Kind of going back to the initial need for this machine for the Marine Corps. It was originally a demonstration program for the Marine Corps. The Navy contracted us at Lockheed and Command to build this thing, take it over to Afghanistan as a demonstration for a 6-month trial, 2 aircraft. And interestingly enough, the NAV Air guys, Navy Air System Command guys, their internal models showed that we would ball up both aircraft within 3 months, and actually had only funded it for 3 months. But we get the aircraft over to Afghanistan, we perform missions, very small demonstration missions. And after 3 months, perfect mission success. Everything that we were tasked to do, we performed. So they extended the mission by another 3 months, thinking, okay, by then, we'll have balled up both aircraft. And lo and behold, we continued to support the Marine Corps with a lot of their logistical supply. And the program transformed from a demonstration program into actually being an operationally viable part of the Marine Corps' mission. The end result was the aircraft was over there for 2 years, moved 4.5 million pounds of cargo almost 2,000 sorties, and were instrumental for the retrograde operations as we're shutting down combat operations in Afghanistan. So a very, very successful program, exceeded the Navy's expectations by quite a bit. So with that, we're leading to kind of night firefighting. You know, many challenges exist for night firefighting. You know, we got to hear from the guys yesterday. It's a very high risk, very difficult job to do. I don't know if anyone out there has ever tried to long line at night with night vision goggles. I'm not God's gift to long lining, but we spent about 20 hours experimenting with different lights under loads and camera systems and trying to figure out depth perception. And it was very, very difficult to the point where I think it's an unviable option in a manned configuration. And the crew chiefs basically had to pull out the seat cushion out of my ass every night coming back from those trial runs. So, but as kind of Brad was talking about yesterday, this aircraft is better than any pilot in the world. This is you know, if I could even come half as close as this machine can fly, it's absolutely amazing. And in how well it's able to stabilize the load, it puts it down within about a foot or so where you want it. When you hand control it, and it can be hand controlled by a ground control operator, it's a very, very precise and stable platform. The capabilities you can kind of see on the right on the screen, it allows for autonomous water pickup. You can program a point in there or manually control it. You're able to have an IROE sensor system where you can see the fires. You can retask this aircraft in flight, dynamically reprogram it. You can have it do autonomous water delivery. You can actually do a post-task analysis so you can see what your effects of water drop were. You can do resupply missions, and extremis, you can actually pull out people if you had to. For the night operation, you do have that sensor package that allows you to see at night. You can look through smoke. You're able to do high-risk missions. Again, you know, we ball up an aircraft. No one loses their life. And our friends at Lockheed, again, they'd love to make another one of these machines. It allows for 24/7 operations. You know, traditionally, you know, everyone know what pumpkin time is, right? Let's go to the bar, drink beer. Well, this will allow us to change a paradigm in firefighting where we can go out at night and do firefighting. It also allows the full motion video to be shared within the ATGC crew. And you know, you're able to develop a real-time situational awareness as we do our operations. And again, autonomous resupply, and it's not degraded by smoke. So, kind of moving on to talk about a little bit about the aircraft itself. It's a unique aircraft. For those that don't know about helicopters, we spend about 20 to 25% of our engine power, which is one of the limiting factors in how much we can pick up. It's just having a tail rotor, just to keep the aircraft pointing straight. The K-MAX doesn't have a tail rotor. It's actually the counter-rotating rotor system is able to negate the Terek effect. So we're able to put all the engine power into lifting, which why it's such a popular machine within the commercial logging industry, firefighting industry, or putting up ski lifts here in Colorado. It has a very unique way of controlling the pitch in the blades, a servo flap system, so there's no pitch change links, wash plates in the traditional sense that make the aircraft a very complex thing. In the unmanned system, it's got multiple different ways of communicating, both line of sight and beyond line of sight. And the ground control station that we use is ruggedized. We designed this thing for Afghanistan in a portable package. It also has a unique feature that came out of test for being optionally manned. And the way we tested this aircraft, the practicality was almost an accident. It is a normal commercial aircraft that we took and put a UAV system in there. And when we were testing it, we didn't have a warehouse full of test vehicles that we could use. We only had one aircraft. So we decided to put a person in the aircraft that could disengage the UAV system at moment's notice when things in the testing program went what we call off nominal, basically out of control, and recover the aircraft. But what that's allowed us to do is navigate the national airspace system without having to use a chase airplane, without getting in the crosshairs of the FAA. We disengage the entire UAV system, and we fly it like a normal aircraft. And the practicality in that is say the aircraft's here in Rifle, Colorado, and we need to go out to a fire up in Boise, Idaho, we would simply just fly the aircraft as a normal helicopter, not violate any of the FARs, and be able to go into UAV mode for nighttime flying. The other nice thing about this aircraft, it is a commercial vehicle, so most of the spare parts are readily available in the commercial market. It's not a unique system where we have to find a one-off part to make this thing work. You can kind of see in the pictures, here's the way the swash plate works. It also has a unique cargo system that it's basically carousel mounted on a little rail. And it's also one of the few helicopters in the world that can lift its own weight. So the aircraft weighs a little less than 6,000 pounds and it can pick up 6,000 pounds. Most helicopters, you can't do that. So here's kind of a quick overview of the machine. It's powered by the T-53, which is the same engine that's in the Huey and the Cobra, a very rugged, reliable engine, which is why they chose it. It comes in at 5,500 pounds plus or minus, and it can pick up 6,000 on the hook. So it's an absolute beast when it comes to lifting. The fleet's accumulated over 300,000 flight hours, so it is a proven design. The other capability of this aircraft that's very unique is that it's a performer at high altitudes and hot temperatures. Density altitude is a function of those, and a lot of aircraft lose the ability to lift as you get higher and hotter. So you can see that the K-MAX, whoops, as it gets in the higher altitudes, it's still able to lift quite a bit of its programmed load. And the Army was mostly concerned about 9,500 feet at 95 degrees. And it's still able to come within 80% of its max allowable limit. So it's an awesome machine at altitude. Again, the aircraft purpose-built for lifting cargo. The logging industry, this is one of the primary aircraft out there. Its intermesher does eliminate the tail rotor, increases power, and decreases maintenance. It was designed for logging, so maintenance-wise, it takes very little maintenance man-hours for every flight hour, a ratio of 1.5 maintenance man-hours to 1 hour of flight time, and burns about 85 to 90 gallons an hour. So it's very efficient for what it can do when you compare it to a Black Hawk, a Chinook, or some of the other Type 1 aircraft out there. Here's kind of an overview of the actual aircraft and some of the modifications. It is the commercial platform, but you can see we've added the tactile communication data link from L3, so it uses the same type of line of sight system that some of the advanced ISR platforms use, which is why we can push some of the data rate packages through the TCDL. It is encrypted, which is a recent addition to the aircraft. We can now do unmanned maintenance test flights. We used to have to put the man in the loop to do any type of post-maintenance checkout. It does have some other modifications like an infrared strobe light for other aircraft working under night vision systems. It also has a very robust redundant flight control system with dual actuators, so there's not a single point of failure within the flight control system. Off to the left of the screen, you can kind of see what we call the ground control station, GCS. And all it is really is a laptop with some communication systems built in. When we designed this for the Marine Corps, we knew our target audience, 19, 20-year-old kids. And what did those kids grow up with? They grew up with PlayStation. So we actually designed a PS2 controller for the local operator when he's moving the aircraft. You put one of these in a Marine's hands, they know exactly what to do with a PS2. So, yeah, it worked. It worked. The kids got it right away. And here's a little bit closer view of the ground control station. You can see he's got the PS2 controller. The actual GCS is just a laptop. And it is a very compact, robust package. So it allows you to do a lot of different things. Not only can you have the GCS in a remote location in a field environment, but it's also portable to putting it into a mobile platform such as the MMA if you wanted to do retrans or have an air attack right there talking to the GCS guys while you're in the air. So there's a lot of modularity and the ability to put it into very small confined spaces or remote locations. So real quick, just overview of the capabilities one more time. You're able to program waypoints through this thing and have the aircraft go to a dip site, fly a prescribed route, drop fire on a local area. You're able to take control of that aircraft and fine tune it if you have to do daisy chains, spot fires, whatever it may be. Again, it's got multiple different communication system, line of sight and beyond line of sight, which is satellite based. You're able to actually take this aircraft, launch it from one site under a GCS, fly it across the country, and have another GCS station take control and do a pinpoint drop. And you know, we saw in Afghanistan that these guys would actually stack loads at the remote location in order for the forklift drivers to have easy access to the pallets. The aircraft, if it does lose link or something does off nominal happen where the GCS shuts down, it can land itself. It can go to pre-programmed emergency waypoints or landing sites en route. Again, we can put a pilot in the aircraft for transiting the NAS. It's a very precise system. And if you've never seen the KMAX fly, it's actually a very, very quiet aircraft. You can actually sneak up with folks on this thing, and it's got very little downwash. When this thing's flying right at you, you don't hear it till it's about 200-300 feet from you. And again, the machine doesn't care if it's daytime or nighttime. Here's kind of just a quick overview of what we did in Afghanistan with the aircraft. 4.5 million pounds of cargo. That's a lot of bullets, beans, and beers. That's a lot of trucks that we took off the road. That's a lot of kids that we saved by not having them deliver a pallet of water through Taliban country. Did a lot of retrograde operations towards the end of the mission to include taking the Brits back home. We were able to launch within 2 hours of getting a mission request, which is usually the timeline for deliberates for the man folks in the military. And then the other kind of interesting thing is the direct operating of this cost of this aircraft is very low. $1,300 an hour is pocket change in the aviation world when you compare it to a Chinook. Some of the commercial Chinooks, you're paying 25 grand a day and $16,000 a flight hour. This is a tenth of it and is delivering half the cargo. So it's a very, very economical platform to do this type of work. And again, you can see the ground control station, the aircraft, and some of the data links on the upper left. So one more time, here's really why this thing is the cat's meow. It's optionally piloted. I mean, it allows so much versatility that you can't get with a traditional UAV with chase airplanes. Putting a guy in the aircraft makes life a lot easier, and we found this both in test and the operational world. It does have that intermesher, so it is built for lifting. It's very precise. It has a small footprint. It does have very reduced operating costs, and it's tested. It's been out there, and the popularity of this aircraft is so great that in that very first video, they restarted the production line for this aircraft, which had been shut down for almost 20 years, to include Richie over here buying two of those bad boys sometime next year, right? He's actually one of the first customers for the new aircraft, and he'll be presenting 2 speeches after me. So kind of transitioning a little bit into the commercial utility. This aircraft, this is not a pie-in-the-sky aircraft. This thing's been proven in Afghanistan. And with a little bit of modification, we can make this a firefighting option for the community, especially when it gets to nighttime firefighting or really smoky environments or high-risk missions. The other interesting thing is this disaster recovery. We actually, while we were testing this aircraft, got a request from the Japanese government during the Fukushima nuclear meltdown. We actually were going to go over to Japan and put out the reactor fire with this aircraft. Didn't get a whole lot of press, and in the very last second, when we're sitting in Dover Air Force Base, broken down, ready to go overseas, they turned us off. But the genesis of the firefighting program came from experimenting with how we're going to put this reactor out with this machine. Because at the end of the day, who cares that the aircraft gets contaminated? We can fly over the reactor all day long without endangering any human personnel, to include myself, since I was one of the few pilots at the time for the machine. In terms of resupply, again, you don't need roads, you don't need a very sophisticated transportation network in order to do resupply. The aircraft actually has a function where we can put multiple loads on a carousel, so we can drop 4 different loads off at 4 different locations. Don't need to do any transshipments. And again, we can move, 4,500 was our nominal number for the Marines. Distances over 100 nautical miles, which is greater than most fires. So one more video, and we'll open it for questions. And this is the demo that was done for Brad up in Idaho last summer, or last fall, excuse me. And you can see the aircraft's putting loads. This is completely autonomous within a foot. That's your standard Bambi bucket. Actually, this is up in Connecticut, excuse me. And they're teaming it with another UAS system, but so there you go, folks. There's a look at what we believe firefighting at night looks like in the commercial arena. So one more time, just to wrap up, aircraft, a lot of adaptability. It can be used 24/7. It's very rugged, very reliable. Again, 1.5 maintenance man hours per hour of flying the thing. Very minimal footprint. Very robust UAS system, multiple redundant different parts of the system. It does provide that flexibility in being optionally piloted, get us through the NAS. It does have a bunch of different sensor packages that we can put on there for night and day firefighting. It can do cargo delivery. It can do other commercial services. It is able to work in contaminated areas. It can do additional things like mapping, and it does integrate with other UAVs if wanted, or manned platforms like the MMA. So, who's got questions? Richie, what you got?
I noticed when there said experimentally certified. Is there a plan to get an STC?
Well, that's an interesting question for the FAA. Right now, there's no regular or restricted category that the FAA has for a UAS designation. So it would be some sort of experimental category.
So stay in experimental category until
Sorry about that, guys. This mic is going to be the death of me.
So until our friends in Washington catch up, it'll be experimental.
Right, so for those of you who don't know, the FAA has three types of certification on aircraft. Standard category, which means you can put folks in it and charge money and then be a regular airline. There's also restricted category, so a lot of the surplus Hueys, you can't put passengers on that aircraft, but you can do external load commercially. And then there's experimental, and those are warbirds. You can't do anything with those things commercially. Now, this being a UAS, we're kind of in a very gray world, and our friends at the FAA in Washington haven't really answered that question. What category does this aircraft fall in? Does it even fall under the experimental, restricted, or standard category criteria? And that's a case-by-case basis that the folks in DC have been answering. When we're working under DOD, we didn't have to comply with any of that, but now as this aircraft starts looking at commercial opportunities, that is something that has to be answered. And I don't know if, John, if you have any more insight on that than I do, but that's the way I know it as right now.
Yeah, John McMillan with Lockheed Martin, so a lot of this is mine. So supplemental type cert, yes, we're looking at that. The FAA hasn't given us guidelines on how we're going to go through and put that up yet. The unique thing with fire is since you're within a TFR, they're allowing us to fly with different regulations. So whenever we're flying in the NAS, you know, we're flying under piloted operations. The platform stays the same as the K-1200. And then once you actually get into unmanned operations, you're inside a TFR, they're giving us some latitude to do that. They have approved us today under COAs to fly fully unmanned in the NAS. But that gets down to, you get to a geographical region where you get that approved. And that's something we're doing on a case-by-case basis right now until they give us what that certification path is going to be for the platform.
Okay, I'll explain why it's so sensitive to us, but, so when you're flying from fire, when you're ferrying from fire to fire in the NAS, you're experimental? Yes. Okay.
Are you looking at putting a tank system on it besides hanging a bucket for when you go into the urban interface that have 3 ways of power lines and stuff like that? Are you guys going to look at?
There is a tank system for the KMAX available. It hasn't been tested with the UAS, but there is a capability. You know, having fought fires myself, I find the long line a lot more versatile. You can get into a lot tighter spots that you normally couldn't, creeks, for instance, especially here in Colorado to get water. But it is capable of doing both. And I did hear someone talk about sense and avoid. For those that aren't familiar with sense and avoid technology, you hear a lot of the UAS folks talk about it. It's until our airspace gets fully integrated with ADS-B in and out, it's actually a long ways off, and it's a lot tougher to do than what a lot of folks would leave you to believe. We've looked at this. It's very difficult and it's very expensive, and I think it's at least one more generation away before we see that technology starting to come into real-world applications. You'll hear other people say otherwise, but having worked with it myself, I think we're a long ways off, which is why the OPV system is a solution to something that isn't quite yet there.
All right, time for one more question.
What are the environmental limitations? Like wind, icing?
Yeah, the question is, what are the environmental limitations?
You definitely don't want to get into icing with this aircraft. It's not icing certified. It does have some unique issues with yaw control in a crosswind, so it does require, it has a yaw authority limit of 17 knots for a crosswind, tailwind on this aircraft. So that's one of the parts of operator training in this aircraft. When you're coming into a hover and do a landing, you know, if you do have a pretty strong wind out there, you want to make sure you're pointing in the wind. Otherwise, the aircraft's just going to weather vane on you by itself, and that's just the inherent part of this particular design.
All right, hey, thanks a lot, Njord, that was great. Let's give Njord a hand, you guys.
Thanks.
All right, moving right along. Next up, we've got Kim Harris. Hopefully some of you saw Kim outside with his night vision goggles last night and got to test those out. That was pretty cool. Thanks for being here and for letting us see the technology. He's going to present on night vision equipment, technology, and training. So let's give him a hand.
Well, good morning. So I appreciate everybody that took the time to step outside last night and look at the NVGs. It was pretty brisk. Those that did look through them last night, that was a kind of a poor area to do it with all the trying to look through all the bright street lights out at the distant hills, but they still work well. So we'll just move into this as we go here. So our intent here is that we provide a clear understanding on the way forward for night vision goggles. That that that's my intent here, is that when I'm done, that you've got the basic skeleton framework of what it would take to start up an NVG program in your organization. So why NVGs? First thing is, we will cover, then talk about the aircraft modifications, training for pilots and any crew, and then the NVG servicing, maintaining the NVGs. So starting with an overview of ASU and then the NVGs in the civil aviation, firefighting, how we implement a program, talk briefly about the white phosphors, and we'll wrap the whole thing up. So ASU has been in business since 1995, specifically for the purpose of night vision goggles, selling the goggles, modifying the aircraft, servicing the goggles, providing training. So we've got a new facility in Boise. We also have a service center in Bogota, Colombia. And to date, we've done a lot of stuff there. Obviously, 20,000 goggles, done a lot of training, set up a lot of repair centers around the world, trained a lot of crew members. We hold a Part 145 certificate, 141, 135, as well as 133 and 137, all to facilitate our business of night vision goggles. Getting close to 50 employees, brand new facility in place now, a couple of years, but nice facility, large enough to handle a lot of the aircraft until we start getting into the tanker size. So we expect to modify our 1,000th aircraft by this spring, and that's a lot of aircraft, a lot of STCs. Those are STC'd aircraft. So a big accomplishment there. So these slides will be available later, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this sort of thing, but for training, we provide 141 training as well as 135 training for pilot, crew members, instructors, maintainers, both for the NVGs and aircraft maintenance. We have a Cessna 206 we use for NVG training, as well as the Bell 206 for training. Have a terrific training area. I've been all over the world training in a lot of different aircraft, a lot of different environments, and it's really tough to beat what we've got for training area because we have the mountains, we have the urban interface, we've got desert and stuff. The only thing we don't really have is large expanses of open water, over water training. And over 3,800 crew members trained to date, so done a lot of it. That's just more stuff. I don't want to spend too much time on that. Again, these slides will be available in short order. We got you saw the mount and the battery pack last night. If you just stop by, we've got a new mount and battery pack. There'll be a big step forward on all that stuff. If you ever talk to people and say, oh, you've got the problems with this and problems with that, those are solutions that are going to be bulletproof. So NVGs and civil aviation. Helicopter ambulance would be clearly the leader in this stuff. Law enforcement is the next thing, but some search and rescue, again, the law enforcement, fire, that sort of thing, some pest control, mosquito, natural resource use, but helicopter ambulance is the primary NVG user. As far as others, there are some corporate Part 91 operators out there using NVGs, certainly some commercial Part 135 operators using NVGs. In ag, we see that right now as the next big market, along with firefighting. So the firefighting issues are still going to be contractual issues with the Forest Service. The Forest Service has got the one contract that's going now with Helicopter Express, and you'll get more of that information. But that's where everybody's in a crawl, walk, run stage and seeing how everything works and how it moves forward. So, and then combine that with some of the other technology you're hearing about here. It should be pretty interesting next decade, I would say. So why night vision goggles, right? And it's because they allow us to see. It's such a basic concept, but if you think about it, there just aren't any blind pilots, right? We have to be able to see. There's some one-eyed guys out there, not very many, but there's some one-eyed guys. But we have to be able to see to fly. And that's what the NVGs provide us. Just as a sample, that's over in Dumbos, Norway. It's a farmhouse out in the distance. And as you might imagine, it's what it looks like at night without any night vision goggles. Whoops, and a picture is not popping up. So I'm going to move to the next slide here. Here's a video that we'll just start running. This is up in Canada. That is Port Alberni that's causing the glow out in the distance, but people have asked, can we see cloud or can we see smoke? And you can see that low cloud hanging there. There's certainly no mystery that there's cloud. And there's no mystery about smoke. There's not a problem seeing smoke around a fire with NVGs because the fire is creating so much light. So you're not going to see through it. It is not a FLIR system. It's an obscurant, just as you see here, it's blocking the lights and that sort of thing. So they're very, very capable. Never a mystery that there's cloud or smoke there, but it doesn't stop you from being dumb and flying into it. One of the things, as you looking at this video here, and with time, if you look at other videos and other photographs of taken through NVGs, anytime you take a photograph or a video through NVGs, the camera is always going to overexpose any light source that's in it. So you're always going to see these lights as being big and bright and glowy. And that's not the way it looks to the human eye. And again, if you looked through the goggles last night, you would have seen that. Had I taken a picture last night through the goggles, I didn't think about it, I should have done that and included it in this, you would have seen a big difference. It would have looked not very nice at all out there across that parking lot and the distant hillside. And in fact, when you look through them with the goggles, it's fine. So every time you see a picture or video and those lights look horrible or looks like it's unusable, that's not the way it really operates. So having said that, fire is extraordinarily bright. As Mike Sagely addressed last night, and Richie can attest to, it's the brightest thing that I've ever seen in their goggles, and it does create safety issues mitigated through training and procedures. But you do, flying night vision goggles in and around fires is its own animal. Mike Sagely referenced it as doctorate level flying, and I would concur with that. It's very technical skill. So why the goggles? They allow us to see. Typically, at night, of course, we're going to have cooler temperatures, higher humidity, same thing that's been talked about, and lower winds. And while it's going to slow down operations anytime we work at night and having to do the tank fill, the ground fill, and that sort of thing, all of that slows down, but we gain in the production of the performance and of the aircraft. And it's not to say that down the road we can't look at hover fill, right? Filling our cells, tank fill off of open water. I've done some work up in Canada with an S61 under goggles, and I think that the issues are largely airframe based. And it seems like with the S61, we were able to do multiple fills from suction pump, and we had no obscuration or windscreen issues where we'd get a lot of moisture on the windscreen or anything. So I think that's largely airframe based. So don't rule out, or don't think we're going to be locked into ground fill only. I don't think that is necessarily the case moving forward. It will take some evaluation, controlled, under a controlled environment, that sort of thing. But I think that it's eminently doable with some airframes, certainly. So better aircraft performance overall, of course, with cooler temperatures. And the retardant, whatever it is, water or other, is going to perform better at night under cooler temperatures and higher humidity than it is going to during the day. So you get all these force multipliers, if you will, to get everything to work well. So we can see up to maybe a 40% increase in potential firefighting time. Right now, as Njord said, we turn into pumpkins as the sun goes down, and we don't necessarily have to do that. We can keep that aircraft in operation. It's going to take a lot more support and with crew and maintenance and all that sort of thing. That Richie will be able to address that in detail. But it does give us a lot more bang for the buck on any given airframe, and mostly in that time frame to attack a fire when the conditions are favorable, either early in the cycle or when the conditions change, we can take advantage of that and knock that stuff down at night. A lot of times we have those advantages. So it's certainly something to think about. Expands our initial attack window by quite a bit as well. The increased asset utilization, something Richie will address as well. The implementation, we start with, if we haven't done the aircraft before, we're not familiar with it, then we would do an aircraft survey and program quote. We've done almost all of the Type 1 and Type 2 aircraft out there as far as doing the initial survey. We're very comfortable with doing those. We've done a number of S-61s as well, Type 1s. Have not yet done a K-MAX. We'd love to do that. But if we haven't done it before, we do an aircraft survey, do a program quote, get you a price. If that's acceptable, purchase orders generated for the goggles, aircraft modification. All aircraft NVG modifications under any standard category aircraft must be done through an STC process. There is no field modifications to these things. FAA is not going to go down that road. Training for crew, some training for the when you're doing ground fill operations, some training is essential for those folks as well, but it's not a big involved process. For the 135 operators, we provide training manual supplements, NVG training manual supplements to the operator, as well as supplements for their GOM. So it's a kind of a turnkey, it is a turnkey solution. We have a day of academic training and typically 5 hours of flight training. It's not a big burden. We do it over 3 nights, 2 pilots a night, and you're off to the races. So it works well. We've done thousands of pilots at this point, and we've got a very successful program. NVG inspections and servicing, they must be inspected every 180 days. There's no options for that. Inspection can be done by any qualified A&P, but the kicker is the equipment that it takes to do that is fairly expensive. It takes a pretty good fleet of NVGs to make that cost effective. So for you got 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 goggles, it is less expensive to send them into a service center than it is to start up your own program. Having said that, we're happy to sell you the equipment and provide the training to start your own program. We've got no problems with doing that at all. If you send them in for us, and I know the other service centers are pretty quick too, but we advertise a 72-hour turnaround. Typically, they turn in 24 hours. They come in the morning and go out that afternoon or the next day is what's typical, but not always. So if we don't have don't have to work on them or do anything other than inspect. And if somebody's taking care of their goggles, they will go year after year without any repairs. They're extraordinarily reliable. Military has worked out all the kinks in these things over quite a few years. The basic housing and everything has been around for decades and very, very reliable. So the binoculars that NVGs we sell come from L3. They are the leading goggle in the industry. The goggles that we are selling now for operations within the U.S., if it's all domestic work, are the best goggle available in the world. We've got, see folks here from the, I assume the Colorado National Guard. What we're selling is better than what you guys have got. What you've got is several years old, and we're a step above. If you're familiar with numbers, your running at about 2,400, and these are currently out at about 3,300. So a big step in performance. Very, very good goggles. Just are not going to find a better thing available. And that's across the board with either there's two manufacturers for NVGs. L3 is who we represent. ITT, another very good goggle. We represented them for years, and they also are very, very good. Not quite to the same level. They're working on it, but L3 took a big step on them when they came out with these, what we call the AI tube, Advanced Image Tube, and the white phosphor. So all that is under work with ITT, but they're not there yet. We kind of not scavenge, but work with both operations. We still buy all of our battery packs and mounts from ITT because they have a better system than L3. And then, as I said, we're developing our own, which is going to be pretty much bulletproof and better than all that stuff. So, trying to think of anything else there. Probably nothing much that is terribly important there. The white phosphor is the big deal right now, introduced in 2015 by, or we introduced it in 2014, Exelis or ITT in 2015, but their product line is still in a startup mode and still working out some bugs on that. The interesting thing is that change in phosphor, there's a lot of people out there that are a little skeptical if you've got NVG experience and moving from the green to the white, but I can tell you that it's worth the transition. It works exactly the same way. It does not matter how your aircraft is modified. If the aircraft is modified for NVGs, they work equally well with white or green. It makes no difference. The only thing that has to be included is on your flight manual supplement. That model number, part number has to be listed in the flight manual supplement. Pretty easy thing to do. The things that we get from the white phosphor that aren't necessarily obvious is our unaided night vision is shades of gray, right? We're seeing just black and white images, if those that are familiar with the physiology of the eye. And we have black and white images. So it feels like a much more natural image. And that's the common thing. If I don't say anything to somebody and take them out and say, what do you think? One of the things that they'll say is, it feels more natural. And that's why. Another is that it's softer, it's easier on the eyes. And that's because the green, our eyes are very, very sensitive in the green band, right? And so P43 phosphor, the green phosphor, is in that same band. And it's more happenstance than design, actually. When you look back at the history, it's an interesting story in itself. The P45 phosphor is still very strong in the green band, but it has a much broader step over the overall lighting band that in the visible spectrum that we can see. So we see it as white. And that means that we're engaging more of our light receptor cells. We're engaging 3 times as many light receptor cells with the white phosphor as we are with the green phosphor. My analogy is if you, when you go to get on the airplane today or take your bags out to the car, pick up your suitcase with one finger and then pick it up with your hand, and it's the same difference. With the green, we're using one finger. With the white phosphor, we're using our whole hand. We're spreading that workload out over a broader range. So it's easier on the eyes. And because we're engaging more, we see more. We get more information. Our brain is able to process more information. That's why we can see so well in illuminated conditions here. You can see the screen well because we've got a lot of colors and a lot of light. So that's just in a big scheme of things. And the other thing that's interesting is because there's a strong blue component in this white phosphor, we actually are also engaging a small amount of our cone or rod cells that we use at night. And so we're, again, broadening that light receptor base. So it's a pretty interesting product out there. So still packaged in the same image tube. Everything is exactly the same. We can move white or green tubes around in the housing. It's designed that way. And it's been test flown with FAA test pilots who came in very skeptical and walked away believers. I've flown with all of them, and there isn't anybody that's got a bad thing to say about anybody that's flown with them at this point. So if you hear something bad, ask them if they've flown with these goggles, not with something that's 10 years old. So just to wrap it up, I think that the technology, NVGs in this particular sense, but in all technology, we're going to see a dramatic improvement in the way we fight fires, and particularly in their ability for situational awareness. It's a terrific asset and safety asset. The ability to look around and see the terrain, see the fires, see other aircraft at night, just as we do during the day, is a great asset, and I think it's going to be inevitably moving forward. So these goggles are the best available in the world. Proven track record fighting fires at night with the city and county operators down in California, as well as the contract with Helicopter Express. So there's a clear path to implement that. We'll walk you through that step by step. It is not something that should be intimidating. So it's pretty easy to do, and not, in the big scheme of things, terribly expensive. So, and there's a broad industry base of support for the aircraft modification. We do it, but there's plenty of other people out there that do it as well. Crew training, we do it, but others do it as well. It's not hard to find. And NVG service, same thing. There's a number of places you can go to have that done. So you're not locked into something. You've got the ability to do it yourself. All this stuff is field maintainable as far as the aircraft. It's not something to shy away from. And that wraps me up. Questions?
All right, great. You got time for a couple of questions?
I'd like to walk around. I'm fighting myself to stay here where I can.
The work that Bruce Hubler's doing in ag, do you see that as helping to pave the way a little bit for fixed wing NVG operations and firefighting?
Yeah, I think there's a real market for those single tank, single seat operators like that to do it. Bruce, a local operator for us in Boise, just a quick deal. He modified 3 of his aircraft, and in the first season, he exceeded his best year ever in that he did with 4 aircraft. So 3 aircraft exceeded what he had ever done with 4 aircraft. But more importantly, he says we've done it more safely, because one of the things that I didn't get into, I'm pretty limited on time, but the NVGs work a lot like our eyes, right? If we turn all the lights out in here and I ask you to walk around in here in the dark, you're going to have a really tough time doing that. You turn the flashlight on, and by God, it's pretty easy to do. You can see that. If I strung a wire across the aisle here, you could find that wire pretty easy with a flashlight. Certainly not going to do it at night very easily. So the goggles work the same way. People think that you have to fly around in the dark. That's not the case. The aircraft searchlights, and I didn't talk about this, but you do not want infrared searchlights. All you want is standard incandescent bulb white light, just the same aircraft light you've got now. You're not changing any of that stuff. IR is strictly tactical. It's the only purpose for infrared light, only purpose. So when we're flying with NVGs, and I'm coming out across a field as an example for this, or for ag, or for flying up in the mountains, if I'm doing it without any lights, it's really tough to see the wires. Ventura County showed a picture up there the other day, and you saw the poles, didn't see the wires. That photo came from us. Had we used a searchlight in that same thing, all those lights, all those wires would be easily seen. I did a demo with Bruce that sold him. He has a field that had wires at the beginning of the field. There's a set across the middle and another big set at the end. And he says, and he's got his ag airplane, and he already does a lot of night flying before he started. So they're equipped with these big old lights on them and stuff, big old driving lights. And he says, I can see the lead-in wires As I cross those, I can just pick up that wire in the middle, and as I cross that, I can just pick up the wire at the far end. So we came in with our one little tiny 250-watt searchlight on our helicopter, just flying that same profile, and before we'd even rolled out, we could see all 3 sets of wires. And so we hadn't even crossed the field, and he said, "I'm sold." And then what he came back to us after flying that season is, all of his pilots, without exception, said, it is safer to do this at night than it is during the day, because with the lights, we see the wires so far out. And plus, we're not, they used to do some during the day, some in that golden hour, dusk and dawn, because they're trying to avoid the pollinators. Very, very difficult flying at that time, and then very stressful. And so their crew, their rest program and meals and stuff were all screwed up. He says, now we just get up, have a nice dinner, and go fly all night, and come back, have breakfast, go to bed. And we're more efficient. Our crews are happier. The families are happier. Life is good. He is 100% sold, and we're doing more. So any other questions? I'm an advocate of goggles, in case you can't tell.
Got time for one. Yeah, do you see with the white phosphor, or just technology in general, the goggles getting a wider field of vision?
No, that, and I can't explain it. I'm not the math guy, but we've got a PhD on our payroll that can. But it's a mathematical problem as to when you start getting wider, it changes the dynamics and the size inside the tube. You just can't get there without having something that's unwieldy and for a head-mounted device. So no, it's what you see right now is it, and people think of it as a narrow field of view, and it was brought up, but you know, as I stand here, if I had a set of goggles, I can see the entire back of the room. It's a pretty big field of view. I move it like this, I get everything I need. People find when they're flying that their head movements don't change a lot from what they do during the day. But what you do lack is some of those peripheral cues. Like if I'm looking this way and something moves or out here, I'll miss that with the goggles. It's not that I don't have peripheral vision, but it's dark. That's one of the other myths is we lose that. The goggles hang in front of our eyes. We look underneath the goggles for all of our flight instruments. We're not looking at our flight instruments through the goggles. So I've got that. I can see all the way out here. And if I've got lights on, I can see as well. But when it's dark, that's when it becomes harder to do. So you don't lose the peripheral vision, but there's no near-term solution for that. You've seen the pictures of the 4-tube things that Spec Ops guys have got, some of the fast movers. Very expensive, they're heavy, they're difficult to maintain, and there's no commercial production for those. And I've flown with them, they're not a fun thing to fly with. That's not gonna happen with where we go now. Possibly in some sort of a digital, but digital, it sounds funny, but digital technology is far too slow right now for NVGs. It is not fast enough, and it's got a long ways to go to get there. So it's not a near-term thing.
All right, you guys, thanks. So we'll have to wrap it up there. Kim, thank you so much. That was some really interesting information.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Kim. Next up, we have, again, another Colorado company, the Global Supertanker. Cliff Hale and Bill Moody are here to talk about 747 Supertanker tactical uses in night operations. So we're looking forward to it, guys. Come on up.
Well, up to this point, we've pretty much focused on the night vision program, night operations with the rotor wing aircraft. Now we're going to introduce you to a new concept we call maybe a possible new paradigm in aerial firefighting. And we actually can build upon this operational experience that the rotor program has had. Looking at about 38 years of operational history, whereas we are just infants in this, just trying to evaluate whether we can have an effective program with fixed-wing air tankers at night. So we're capitalizing on this history, and I think it's going to help us a great deal in our potential development. First, I'd like to thank Paul Cook and the Colorado Division of Fire Prevention and Control, as well as Melissa with the Center of Excellence, for giving us this opportunity just to share with you some of our ideas, maybe some of our dreams, and just being able to attend here and capitalize upon the information, the experience that the Rotor Wing program has had. So our role here is not one to give answers, but it's one here to hopefully answer a lot of questions, and we're just in the learning mode. I think Melissa did mention that we are a Colorado company now. Our base of operations is in Colorado Springs. This is just a recent development. I would like to just talk a little bit about paradigms. I began my aerial firefighting history in 1957 as a rookie smoke jumper, still active in the aerial program as an air attack and working with the 747 program. But I've seen really a history of paradigms since I began in 1956. We can go back to some of the first uses of rotor wing aircraft. I believe this is a 1947 picture in Southern California, one of the early Bell helicopters, to where we are today with a variety of Type 1 helicopters. And we do, I put this in here too for Keith and for Brittany from Columbia. But we have other operators too, as well as with the S-64s and Chinooks, 234s, 107s. So we have the beginning of this history of paradigms. We also have history here in the air tanker program, going back to on the left is a Stearman dropping 125 gallons on the Mendocino National Forest, the Mendenhall Fire in 1955, to where we are today with VLAT aircraft between 11,600 gallons and the 747 supertanker at 19,400 gallons. So this is another paradigm. What I have found in my history of aerial firefighting is that each time we make a major step improvement, increase the size of the aircraft or the gallonage of products that can be dropped, it's oftentimes met with a lot of resistance. It's the automatic response is it can't be done. It's too big, it's too costly, or some other reason. And it's sometimes very, very difficult to move beyond some of these concepts to making them operational. Oops. There's also the VLAT paradigm, going back to 2006, the first operational year of the DC-10 tanker, and also the development of the 747. That was under Evergreen Aviation. The program now is under Global Supertanker Services, who recently took over from the Evergreen, after Evergreen went through bankruptcy a couple of years ago, and it's now Global Supertanker Services. And I might add too that the aircraft has been upgraded from a 100 series to a 400 series, much better performance, and we are in the process now of recertification. But I would also like to commend 10 Tanker, that in the last 3 years where we have not been available, they've done a great job. I think they have really sold the VLAT concept as just one of the very valuable tools in the aerial toolbox. And the night paradigm, going back to 1977, and this is where, again, that history is going to be very important to us as we evaluate the feasibility of 747 in night air tanker operations. So a new paradigm, that's what we are considering. And kind of a little bit of the history here. the frequently asked question we get, particularly after we started marketing the 747 or even the VLATs in general, is can you operate at night? This was asked both internally in our staff, in a lot of our marketing domestically, and particularly as we go overseas, a lot of the agencies there ask this question, and Cliff Hale will talk a little bit more about that in his presentation when we talk about our drops made in Israel. So we had a lot of questions. I'm sure management has a lot of questions as well. Is this technology there? And I think from what we've experienced here the last couple of days, yes, I think the technology is there that would make it feasible in terms of night vision. Can it be done safely? That's what we need to evaluate. We think that we can at the altitudes that we would be operating at and with the drop system we have, but this is something that would have to actually be further evaluated during an R&D project. What are the advantages? I think this has already been covered. Can it be done as safely or more safely and effectively than the day operations? Do the benefits outweigh the risk? Is it cost effective compared to the day ops? What are the prerequisites for really tactical operations? And again, those are questions that we have, and I'm sure that you have, and management in general would have. And a lot of this cannot be answered until we go through a very thorough evaluation through an R&D project. In terms of our perspective, we know that the environment is challenging. We've had enough fire experience to know that, and I think that Mike yesterday in his talking about LA County in his presentation talked about the risks involved in the environment, from smoke and winds and terrain, etc. We also acknowledge that it's going to have to be conducted at a higher altitude above ground. We cannot be operating at 150 or 200 feet like we do during day operations, but we're going to have to look at significantly higher drop altitudes. Just a little bit about the aircraft. We think that we have an aircraft that can do the job safely and effectively. With the volume, high volume that we have, 19,400 gallons, with the drop system we have, which was somewhat purposely designed for higher altitude drops, which lends itself quite nicely to night ops, the footprint that it can provide, and also the speed and range. We, at 600 miles per hour, once we go through the low altitude restrictions, we can get up to 600 miles an hour because the system is all internal. So just looking at what we are looking at in terms of drops, effective drops, we would look probably at a minimum of 400 feet AGL, and I think through our research and development, we'd look at a range probably a minimum of probably 400 feet, 500 feet, perhaps 600 feet. But we'd look at much higher drop altitude above ground than we do for the day operations. Footprint, the higher we get, the wider the footprint. Depends what your objective is. If your objective is fire weather modification, it would lend itself quite nicely to that, covering a rather broad area during the night in preparation for the day operations. And we have a distance, again, depending on the coverage level, anywhere from coverage level 2, coverage level 8, which would take us anywhere from 0.6 of perhaps a mile at a higher coverage level to up to 2 miles of a light coverage level, again, depending on what the objective is. We know that it has to be fire specific. We know that doesn't apply to every fire, but this would be up to the incident management team, the IC, the ops, the AirTAC, to identify, are the parameters right for a night operation with a fixed wing, terrain, wind, etc. So all those factors would be factored in, and there probably only initially be a very small percentage of the fires would be suitable for the initial evaluation fires. And I think once that experience is gained, it could probably be broadened to include a higher percentage of fires. We think that, that we have the opportunity here to make fire weather modifications and also to do some tactical operations that we normally do. Direct attack strategy, indirect. As we look at at our objective, we would look, one of our objectives would be to provide a service that would reduce fire behavior indices by pre-treating an area, particularly those that are going to be in the plan for the following morning. We feel that we can thus offer a safer ground operations environment for the crews just by the fire weather modifications and the pre-treatment that can be done. And very importantly, to offer tactical support. We just picked out the arbitrary time here of 8 in the evening or 2000 hours to perhaps 10 o'clock the next morning, depending on what time the tankers come on. Sometimes the tankers are not up and actually on the fire until 10 o'clock. But we could provide anyway that gap at night from 2000 till the following morning. We've already talked about the critical fire behavior burning period. We're all aware of that. This is when we focus our ground operations. Oftentimes finding that our ground folks aren't on the fire until about 900 in the morning. By the time they go through briefing, get to the fire, they're actually on the line. So we could provide, you might say, a fire behavior environment through pre-treatment drops in the late morning or before they get there, even during the dark hours, that would make it a much better and safer environment for them. And our air operations are pretty much focused around those critical periods, and we normally are operating from around 9, 10. Some agencies are more proactive and do a better job of providing those resources earlier. And usually around, as an average, around 2000 hours our operations, both with rotor and fixed-wing air tankers, pretty much comes to a halt. And then we're really without that service until the following morning. So we're looking at providing that service between 2000 hours the night before and 1000 hours the next morning when we have crews on the ground. We also have probably have our air tankers back in service. And we've already covered this. Kim talked about this, the obvious advantages. And the strategies that could be provided, I think very effectively, would be the direct, perhaps the indirect attack. And the blue line there represents where there could possibly be a drop made, and hopefully to prevent this, particularly as you get the movement of the fire at night, moving downslope, and where you don't have where you require some aerial support. Now you may have the opportunity to provide that aerial support. There may be some areas there that are high priority as far as protection. You were on the Carlton Complex 2014 up in the Okanagan country. That kind of the donut hole in the middle of a 260,000 acre fire. They wanted to protect. They had a lot of resources, and sometimes we get those critical, in certain divisions, very critical ground there in the division that we want. We must stop the fire to prevent it from going across, say, a highway or some major location. And so we are sometimes looking for an opportunity to provide aerial support enough to hold it until we can get the proper ground resources in place the next morning. So just by making the drops for the fire behavior modification, we could, I think, really change the fire behavior in that area, making it much easier for ground resources to be effective the following morning. So we feel that the supertanker is a viable option. I'm going to turn this over to Cliff Hale, and he'll pick it up here for a few.
Just a little bit about me. I was the test pilot on all 3 versions of the airplane thus far, and I'll continue to perform that role on the 400 that we're coming out with. I'm the only captain that's been on the supertanker since it started. The purpose of this slide was to point out that other nations have asked us to perform this mission. And, you know, we're just not quite there yet, but the system was designed for it. I'll get to that in a second. I think this conversation was about swapping jobs, but I didn't go for it. When I said design for the night mission, at the very beginning, when we started working with Boeing, the company wanted the design so that it could drop at night. And of course, the thought was that we're going to have to be able to drop from a higher altitude. So Boeing assigned the task of designing the nozzles to their Rocketdyne division, PhDs in thermodynamics, which I was told at the time were the smartest guys on the planet. But we think they did a good job. As you can see on the column on the right there, we can vary our pressure, and as an example of the capability, I'm sure you all have seen the hill that's just south of the hotel there. We were able to paint a line of retardant on a hill very similar to that, up to 800 AGL from bottom to top, in the attitude that you see to the right there, and just a little bit over idle power. So it was designed to spray retardant where you probably wouldn't want to maneuver the airplane normally. In preparing for the night drop option, we've been seeking out the best advice that we could find, and we've certainly found a lot here, and appreciate everybody that's presented so far or given us feedback. Of course, we are looking at modifying the cabin lighting that's going to be required, and of course, Kim says he'll hook us up with the best MVGs and lighting that money can buy. And something else that we've been looking at is incorporating an ATGS IR target Intel platform, very much like the Colorado MMA that y'all have seen yesterday. We think that is a great platform that could be used to help us develop the night ops standard operating procedures, along with coordination of the airspace. To point out, it could be used to develop the strategy and tactical procedures that we want to use, and actually send those to us while we're sitting on the ground before we even leave, or send them to us en route. Of course, the R&D program that we would take would look at developing, help us develop what the safest drop altitude would be. Is it 400 feet? Is it 800 feet? We don't know. We'd also need to look at the coverage levels at the various drop altitudes. So far, what we've seen, they'd be pretty good, even from 800 feet. We'd have a definite impact on the fire weather. Of course, that's the footprint at the various drop altitudes. The R&D program would help us, develop the operational protocols that would be needed. And we have worked on or developed a 7-phase R&D program. We haven't started it yet, but we at least have the phases identified and all the work that needs to be done. Of course, each phase would have to be complete before we go to the second phase. So, ready? I don't know if I need to mention those or not, Bill.
Okay, just to wrap it up here, looking at the mission, And once we get a determination from the incident management team that they want the services, all the parameters are in spec as far as a go, no-go, we would initiate that mission, probably preceded by the MMA, or the multi-mission aircraft, similar to the PC-12, out ahead to make an evaluation. And we see that this is really a very vital part of this. We would normally are required to operate with a lead plane with the VLATs. Here we would invert the Intel aircraft. We would put the air attack aircraft above the supertanker, and they would evaluate in terms of IR, interface with the ground operations people to verify where the target area is. They would then relay that information to directly to the supertanker, looking at both IR, looking at the start-stop points as far as very specific lat longs, and this would be translated onto a mapping system, and then we could proceed with the drop. So it's a very well coordinated team effort, and it would be a requirement to have that before making any drops. So just one of the images from last year's operations in the PC-12 program, and we get that information. Its target is identified using night vision goggles, and then we could go ahead and proceed with the drop. So to really be a successful program, we think it has to be a very, very solid R&D project. And it would require, I think, an agency sponsor, actually in a joint operation, joint venture. And this is something that I think would be very important for an agency to kind of take the lead and to work with, interface with. And this would then lead, hopefully, to fire incidents where the program could be evaluated. And on the individual incidents, it would take certainly an incident management team that's very committed to the concept to give it an honest evaluation through the IC, the ops, the air attack, and so on. So again, it's maybe viewed as a far-out concept. Well, I've seen a lot of those in the past. When we consider a new paradigm, it goes through a lot of discussion, a lot of evaluation, but I think we feel that this has some merit, and I think through a well-designed R&D project, we could determine the feasibility of fixed-wing tanker operations in the future. Thank you. Just might say there is a little handout here that some of you received in the rows. I think there's some out on the table there. It's just kind of a new paradigm, kind of discussing some of the points brought out.
Thanks a lot, Bill. Hey, you guys, time for a couple of questions here for Bill and Cliff. All right. Hang on, Jorn. I'm going to start at the back here. Darlene, did you have a question?
Yeah, I got a two-part question.
Hang on.
How far?
I'm talking close.
Two-part question. First part, how far off are you from the cup test? Secondly, since it's going to be a night ops and the visual, your slideshow is different, are you going to have to do the drop test at night too to show that difference?
Yeah. Well, we're trying to get ready for the grid tests if we have to do those. It's something that we're talking to the Air Tanker Board about. It may not be required this time, for this airplane, because everything's pretty much the same as the grid tests haven't changed. The requirements haven't changed since the first airplane came out and passed those tests. And your second question was, could you repeat that again?
Well, since you're going to be doing it at night, the test was done in the daytime, it's going to be a different perspective, different altitude. Would you have to do the test at night to prove that you can
Well, we would do, a testing. It wouldn't be a formal grid. There is no requirement at this point for, a formal grid. But we would do that anyway. It'd been informal. We'd probably ask San Dimas Technical Center to support us on that and, and do it. So.
As far as the recertification right now, we are not looking at night operations as far as our recertification now with the Interagency Tanker Board. The night operations are totally separate, independent, and would be done at a different time.
Do you have a question, York?
You're going to have to excuse my ignorance, but the little bit I do know about the super tanker was it struggled with certification with its previous owner, and what's the status now, and where are you guys going?
I don't know that we struggled with certification. I mean, I'll give you this, that, there was 2 versions of the system. Yeah, the first one was marginal, and, the tests were not completed. And then the system, there was new management brought in, another system was tested, and it passed. So, and it's, virtually identical to what we're installing now. So, does that answer that? Yeah.
Might say that the thing that's changed would be the aircraft model. The very first model was a 200 series freighter. The operational model was a 100 series, and the current model is a 400 series, much higher performance. Basically the same drop system would be involved with some improvements in terms of reliability and a few other things that would improve really the drop system when it's in the 400 series.
All right, we're going to have to wrap it up. Hey, I'd just like to give a shout out to Bill. You guys think back to the inception of the VLAT program. Bill, I remember a paper you wrote doing some comparisons between the legacy air tankers and the VLAT when you first started working with that aircraft as an ATGS. And I thought it was an impressive write-up on what you can do with that technology. Guys, that's where we're at with the 747. I mean, it's just like a lot of things. We see barriers and folks that are hung up on making advances in technology. But it's great having you guys here. Bill, Cliff, thank you for your presentation. Really interesting stuff, and thank you guys. Let's give them a hand.
All right, we are on the home stretch. Does anybody need to stand up and reach for the ceiling? Go for it. But don't leave, because our last presentation is about to happen. Come back. Yeah, I opened that door. I'm sorry, Richie. We're really excited about your presentation. So up next, guys, our final presentation of the day is helicopter contracts for night operations from a vendor's perspective. And from Helicopter Express, we have Richie Cottrell. So come on. Oh, he's already over here. I'm like, what? Where did he go? All right, so let's give him a hand.
That just goes that way. Yep. Okay. I know I'm standing between everybody and a break, so we'll make this painless, I hope. My name is Richie Cottrell. I'm the Director of Ops and Chief Operating Officer at Helicopter Express. We're based in Atlanta, Georgia. We are the vendor to the U.S. Forest Service for what they call 531. We call 15HX, so I'll probably use 15HX if I return to the aircraft, but the same airframe. We were founded in '96. We've expanded to 24 aircraft and 2 airplanes. We work predominantly with federal agencies and resource work across the country. We've done everything from basic firefighting to rappel, short haul, now night vision goggles, and we do the whole gamut within those agencies. Some of the agencies we work for runs pretty much the standards as far as firefighting, and then we got a few extra. We've worked with Doctors Without Borders and FEMA on some Katrina work as well. So that's sort of our specialty niche. We're not a standard helicopter charter operation. although we carry those certificates. As far as it concerns this presentation of the night vision goggles, we're providing a Bell 205 A1++ with an entire turnkey crew to include fuel trucks and support rigs. And we're at Lancaster, California for 180 days, and if no one's been to Lancaster, California before. At Foxfield, dirt goes to die there. It is in the desert. It is a austere environment, to say the least, and try to maintain an aircraft. We've just completed the third of a 5-year contract, and we have been successful only because this has truly been a partnership between us, Forest Service, ASU. The only partner that gave us a problem was the FAA, and we'll get into that in a minute. So, but it was a quick stand-up. We had, when we were awarded the contract, we had never done NVG operations before. No one had done commercial firefighting NVG operations before. Well, not in a generation anyway. No one on the Forest Service side had been involved in the first iteration of this. None of our guys have been involved in the first iteration of this. And we didn't have any NVG experience because we don't do air ambulance, which is the predominant, as Kim said, that's the majority of the guys in the commercial world running goggles or running air ambulance, and we don't do that work either. So it was a quick turnaround. It was a little challenging. We got the award in March, and we were supposed to be in Lancaster in June, and I didn't have NVG. I didn't have an aircraft set up, and we had 90 days to get there. So we had a few challenges there. We had at the time, 15HX. The aircraft was a slick 205, if you will. It was just a standard firefighting 205. It was a plus. We didn't have to climb that hurdle. So it was one of our regular fleet aircraft. We run 6 of those in our fleet right now. So we had to put it on extended gear. We had to put the tank system on it. We had to put the NVIS, or the night vision goggles system on it. And a few other little odds and ends the Forest Service decided to throw in, like an IO node telemetry unit. And we had to get an op spec changed, and we had to get personnel identified and trained. So I should back up. What I understood that was wanted from us on this is, what are the challenges it would take to stand a program up? And I think we're unique in that we were the side, the actual aircraft side, that stood up a program most recently in this gig. So we had to, because we're a commercial operator, we had to get the FAA involved. So it's not like we can just go out like Mike's got the ability to go do things to his aircraft because it's public operations that we couldn't necessarily do. So the county guys can go and do stuff because they're government operations. We have to, our purview, and the FAA has complete control over us because we have to contractually, and we'll get into this little gray area in a minute, but contractually we have to maintain all our 135, 133, 137 FAA certifications to work with the feds. Although we get into public use aircraft, and that discussion's in a different room altogether. But so we had to get our op specs changed and get all our FAA certifications of the aircraft itself changed. One of the big challenges we had was because of the crewing requirements of the Forest Service. Helicopter pilots are here, firefighting helicopter pilots are here, night vision goggle firefighting pilots are here. They've filed 205s before. So our 205 pool is drying up in general, but guys that have flown goggles, fire, and so we had a very small pool we had to go select from. And then we had to get Kim and his guys in to do our training as well. So then we had to get the Forest Service contract with ASU as well to train their side of the house. So that was a whole training week and a half iteration, end of May, beginning of June. And then we went through carding of our aircraft, or carding of our pilots. So the way the Forest Service has chosen to run this is a day shift and a night shift. So our day shift is a standard crew complement, a pilot, mechanic, and fuel truck driver. And then we add a co-pilot, different set of guys at night for co-pilot, pilot, fuel truck driver, and mechanic. So what normally is staffed with 3 guys is now an aircraft staffed by 7 on my side. And the other difference is on its typical Forest Service contract, it is a 9-hour day. This is 2 12-hour shifts, which is something we'll get to in a little bit later, is some of the mitigations if you were going to start this, some of the things to think about. So we don't run like the counties do and some of the other guys where they're running day guys following the night. We have specific night crew, a specific day crew. This contract was also unique that it had a lot of oversight. It came out of a congressional mandate. So we not only had forest oversight with Darlene and her guys, then we had Sean's guys up in Sacramento, then we had Tom and his guys up at Boise looking over our shoulder too. So there's a lot of QA, and it's a good thing because this program has truly been a crawl, walk, run type of situation, and I think we're just now walking. They put a lot of sideboards on it from the get-go. Like Sean alluded to earlier, that we weren't going to do hoisting, and we weren't going to do some of the other stuff they looked at early on. And that was one of the keys, I think, to make this thing successful, is the focus and encouragement and the true team collaborative effort to make sure that everything was done and we weren't going faster than we should have. So we do have 2 QAs per year. All of the other aircraft I've got in the fleet, they have 1 every other year. So we have 2 per year on this contract. We have a pre-work and an after-action, which we have, typically our contracts are 4-year cycles. We have a pre-work the first year and that's done, and we don't have any formal AARs at the end of the season. But we have them on each of these. And I think that's indicative of the dedication that the Forest Service in general has put into this program and that needs to be happening so that there was a perception, just like the KMAX guys had or the Navy had for the KMAX program, that this was going to fail and that this was just a crazy Forest Service thing. Somebody told them they had to do it, but it has successfully been managed and overseen, and kudos to those guys. The aircraft is attached to Southern California. It's not going to travel. We also have the contract here in Durango for a Type 2. And that 205 stays there maybe a week out of the year. It travels all over the country. This thing, same aircraft or same type of aircraft, same vendor, same contract actually, it's rubber banded to Southern Cal. So it's going to go those four forests, and it's not going to go any further. I've got this slide wrong because I was going on the old data, or where it was originally led. We've got 8 hours of max flying we can do in a day, and as Sean indicated, we're up to 6 now. When it originally was led, we were at 5. So, and I've got another slide in here about the evolution of the contract as we've gone, but that was one of the early ones that they decided they could expand that envelope a little bit. We are ground fill only at night. And we do have a dedicated air attack, which we've talked about earlier. And I didn't say anything yesterday because whatever, but my guys, maybe they're spoiled, but they want Lonnie and Enrico overhead. It is an invaluable resource to them. They feel that's a key component of the success of this program. So our shift changes, as I said earlier, we're on a 12-hour shift. So at each of that end of that shift, we're having to reconfigure the aircraft because during the day ops, we're doing a regular firefighting snorkel mission aircraft. And then at night, we have to configure for night operations. So we have to pull a bubble door off the left-hand side. We have to pull the mirrors off. Somebody asked about mirrors. Because we pulled the bubble door because it's not certified for night flight. We have to pull the mirror so it doesn't interfere with the NVIS system. We have to pull the snorkel because we're doing ground fill only. So, and that's a consistent every 12 hours. And then the night risk assessment they alluded to earlier. What has been another safety aspect to this that's allowed us to be as good as we are as far as incidents or anything on this aircraft is we do have to go through that go, no-go checklist. And it is extensive, and there's no pressure to get off the ground in a certain amount of time. These guys are given, during the day, it's a different deal. We got 15 minutes getaway time, and that's just standard across the board. At night, there's not a set getaway time, and that's pretty important so that everybody in the crew is feeling comfortable with what we're about to go do. Some of the issues we've encountered over the past 3 years is large crew size and the dynamics that go along with that. Like I said, I went from we usually supply as a 3-man crew to a 7-man crew. The Forest Service went from what is typically a 10-man type 2 crew to a 20-plus. There's a lot of interpersonal, and you're living in Lancaster, California for 6 months out of the year in close proximity, and but that's just stuff that's been mitigated over the years. But that was one of the first things. The 24-hour schedule. Running a 24-hour scheduled aircraft that has to move around Southern California and can be launched during the day and go from Lancaster all the way down to San Diego, and then trying to manage that crew change, because when you're bumping up against 14 hours, is one of the big hurdles we still haven't solved. So if we launch the aircraft out, or they launch the aircraft out of Lancaster, and they go down south to the Cleveland, and then my night crew has to go there, they have to drive through Southern Cal traffic to get to that aircraft. And I'm from Atlanta. I thought we had bad traffic. Southern Cal is a different deal altogether. So that's always become a crew issue that and I've said this is not a secret, I'm very vocal. I think we should be going to 2 9-hour shifts, treated as 2 separate contracts, and that would alleviate a lot of this. It's not what they want to do, so that we keep trying to manage that as well as we can, but that's still one of our issues, is a true 24-hour staffing. Education of the ground units and the teams. Sitting in the after-action reports, that seems to be one of the big deals, is how to use this new asset, this new tool in the toolbox. They've come a long way, but that's one of the issues they've gotten over. If you went to pursue this, educating your guys on the ground that you're going to be supporting would be a key component of what you're going to do. And we just talked about the crew change away from base and what that 24-hour schedule. What we've done, what we've changed in the past 3 years, what we've learned, the increased 9-hour limitations, flight hour limitations, that was one of the early ones. We've altered the crew schedule. One of the things we found when we first started, and I'll take credit for the bad idea, we thought we could take a limited cadre of guys, because we had a limited number of guys that could get carded on this contract. And we had some finding of the right people, the right mix to go do something like this. So we could run a guy, because we were on a 12 and 2 schedule. We could run a guy for 12 days, give him 4 days off, then kick him over the night, let him run 12 days at night, give him 4 days off, and kick him back to days. It was a long, convoluted charts all over the place. So that doesn't work. That screws up biorhythms, that screws up all kinds of stuff. That was a bad idea on my part. We have since gone to, mandated through contractual mods, a 12 and 12 schedule for the night guys. So they're 12 days on, 12 days off, and that's all they do is night flying for Helicopter Express and 531. So improved operational training. There is a recurrency requirement in the contract, as well as FA, but the contract's even tighter than the FA. And it used to be they'd just go do some bucket work or some tank work right there at Fox Field. They've actually started incorporating the training out in the field. My guys just find that extraordinarily helpful, actually going out. It helps, my ever so humble opinion, it helps the Forest Service ground guys, the guys running the tanks out that learn how to run the hose lay and what to expect when a helicopter shows up in the middle of the night. So that's been awesome. And they've decreased, it says increased, they've decreased the night, or they have increased the night proficiency period. We were running a night proficiency almost every week, but they found that they could bump it more out towards the FAA standards so that they're not doing these proficiencies as often. Just some stats from what I've gleaned, and Darlene may correct me on some of these. These are numbers of everybody. This is what, when I go to meetings all the time, this is what everybody wants to know. How much are you flying? Because you're only, in Southern Cal, in the 3 years we've been there, hasn't had one of the banner seasons. So this is what we've been doing. I'll just give you the averages. I don't know if you can see those numbers, but average of 135 hours. This is a 180-day contract. 135 hours and 15-day night attacks per year, and 70 flight hours at night and 10 night initial attacks. So And we do that, of course, a lot of that's on campaign fires on the night stuff, integration there. Some of the things that I think you could take away from what we've been through for the past 3 years is take it slow. Don't think you're going to come out here and start fighting fires all the time and put 3 aircraft up and do that kind of stuff. You got to take this one crawl, walk, run model. We're not running yet. We've been at it 3 years now. So we're walking and I'm feeling very confident. I can tell you, to be quite honest, that first year there were a lot of sleepless nights on my part because this is something new for us. We were having some issues, but we had some understanding government folks. We had some challenges we had to come over, but the program is going to give you problems that you don't realize you're going to see. But I'll tell you one thing, an aside I was going to say, what we didn't have, and kudos to you guys, we didn't have anything like this. I get the privilege of going to meetings multiple times a year, and most times it's a bunch of helicopter guys sitting around in the room talking about the same stuff we talked about the year before. But I don't think I've ever been in a room that's had tankers, air attack, unmanned guys, state, federal, kudos. This is what, and vendors. This, I mean, maybe you guys get together amongst yourselves and don't include us, I don't know. But this is invaluable. If you really wanted to kick something off here like this is the way to do it. So you got to understand the limitations of the program and what the goggles can do, what night vision can do in general, and what Kim can talk to that more than I can. But it's not the panacea. It's not going to fix everything, but it's just another tool. Realistic training, not just at an airport, not out here at Rifle, just running around the pattern. Get out in the hills and do what you're going to do, because that's more valuable than just being around here. And build teams. That was the big thing on this. If it hadn't been for the fact that we had ASU on our side, we had the Forest Service, we had some part of the FAA on our side, we would have been in a world of hurt early on. And let me go back, because I promised that earlier when I was asking those KMAX questions. We got to a problem where the night vision goggle, the NVIS system requires some other auxiliary. It has a radar altimeter, and this contract required which is not night vision goggle, but required a traffic advisory system in it as well. Well, the Atlanta FSDO, in their infinite wisdom, decided to kick it up to the ACO because the helicopter originally, and I'm maybe getting in the weeds, and if I get glass-eyed looks, I'll apologize, but it was originally certified as a transport category aircraft because it carried 14 folks in the back. We don't run it that way. We run it as 9 passengers less, like most all the firefighting 205s do. But they kicked it up to ACO. ACO said, well, we're going to need a lot more engineering documentation to install a radar altimeter and a traffic advisory system. Fortunately, we have some friends and our cooperators in the Forest Service says, hey, here's a public aircraft authorization or declaration that you can use and go to work until you get this cleared up. And the ACO had promised us that in 30 days. It ended up being more like 8 months before they got it to us. So had it not been for the public aircraft declaration, we would have been dead in the water. So you've got to, if you stand a program up like this, you've got to, that was an unforeseen thing. That's another one of our unforeseen lessons. But fortunately, through the teamwork and what we were trying to accomplish, we were able to work through that. So let's see if I got anything else. I don't have anything else, so questions?
You guys have any questions for Richie? Anyone?
Cool.
I guess I'm not sure why I'm turning the mic on.
All right, thank you, Richie. We really appreciate your presentation. And I'm sure the lack of questions has nothing to do with you and everything to do with the break. So we're going to take a break right now. We've got food and stuff out in the lobby. Please don't leave, though, because the most valuable portion of this is the conversation that's going to happen afterwards. So please come back and bring your questions and bring your comments. We've got some guided discussion. We've also got some surveys that we'd ask you to fill out, so we'll have those out there. We'll give you about 5 minutes when we come back in to fill those out, and we'll collect them so you don't take them home.
Hey, Richie, you guys, I know Richie's the last presenter for the day. All you guys did a great job. Thanks for some great presentations this morning. Richie, that was awesome. I think it kind of puts a good perspective out there in terms of what we were looking for. You know, Paul Cook and other folks in the room, if we look at some of the challenges we're going to have with standing up a program, as you put it, Richie, I thought that was a good summary of some of the challenges that you guys have been through down on the Angeles and whatnot. But again, thanks you guys. Great job this morning. Appreciate it.
Back here at 10:25. Just a couple announcements before we get started on this roundtable discussion. Juniper Unmanned, a drone company out of the Front Range, is coming tomorrow to do a demonstration. They're going to start about 9 in the morning over at the airport and walk us through sort of all of the paperwork and policy that's involved in getting a certificate of authorization to fly unmanned systems. If you're interested in that, let us know. We'd be glad to have you there if you're sticking around. And then they're going to actually fly around 2 at the remote control aircraft field just north of Rifle. So anybody's interested, we'll get you more information. Also, I just talked to our friends at Global Supertanker. They are planning an open house for when the aircraft actually arrives down in Colorado Springs, probably sometime around April of next year. Of this year. Oh, it's already 2016. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, no, don't worry about it. So they would like to invite this whole group, anybody who's interested, to that open house, and I'll get the invitation from them and make sure everybody gets it. So just as a heads up, if anybody else has anything, we're more than happy to share that with the audience. So is everybody about done? Cool. Well, let's get started. So here's how this is going to work. Dave's come up with some questions that we think will help us have the conversation about where do we need to go next. A lot of us have experience in government where we have these great meetings and then we leave here and we forget everything we've learned and we don't implement any of the lessons that all of these fine speakers have presented to us. So the cool thing about being the center of excellence is we get to do this innovative research and then we get to go back. We have the time, we have the bandwidth, we have the capacity to do this stuff and make recommendations to our operations folks. So that's why we want to have this conversation is, you know, what do you think after these last 2 days, after talking with people, after hearing the presentations? And if you would, you know, I'm going to kind of facilitate the question asking, and Dave's going to walk around with the microphone. If you would just tell us who you are and where you're from so we can get a good idea of who's weighing in, that'd be great. Cool?
You bet.
All right, so our the first thing we want to pose is, you know, after these last 2 days, what questions do you still have on night aerial firefighting operations that folks in this room could maybe answer, or folks in this room can't answer, and we need to try to figure out where to find those answers?
Hi, it's Rick Gickla, lead plane pilot for the U.S. Forest Service based out of Denver. One of the things I've always been taught was any aerial coverage, any aerial work, tactical work, retardant, water drops, anything like that, takes folks on the ground to back it up. We don't get much groundwork here in Colorado, for one, due to the terrain, among other things. You know, it is, to a certain extent, dangerous to put folks out on the line, some of the terrain we got here at night. Has folks considered putting people out on the line to back up these aircraft that you're considering putting out there? Because I don't think you're really doing a whole lot of good by putting the aircraft out there without folks on the ground to back it up. Do we even have those folks to do that?
Yeah, thanks, Rick. That's a really good question. Darlene, are you, some of you guys, yeah, Sean, cool.
Sean A. Dukas from Region 5. The big difference about fighting fire in a tree forest and fighting fire in Southern California is the brush gets tall, but it doesn't fall over. There's no widow makers to hurt a lot of firefighters. We do have about 2 trees there on the Angeles, but they're probably burnt by now. But So it's different. It's something to think about. Is how we're going to put firefighters on the ground in tree forests with aircraft flying above them, dropping water drops. But we fight fire at night. LA County, all of our counties have 24-hour firefighters, and then on high fire danger, Forest Service staffs 24 hours a day. So we do put people on the ground. That's the number one priority before we send our aircraft. Does that answer your question?
Basically, the answer I just heard is that conditions are very possibly dissimilar to the conditions we have here in Colorado, so that's something that certainly needs to be considered by folks before they make a decision.
Yeah, very true. Thanks, Rick and Sean, for the input on that. Anybody else want to weigh in on that?
Say this did, night ops eventually got going, that could be, I would think, part of the no-go checklist, the terrain, fuel type, where you're at, things like that.
And just one thing to add with the Southern California night dropping, sometimes for the access where we're at, sometimes that water dropping will just kind of hold it in place and pin it down until we can get those ground troops in there at daylight. So you're putting them in daylight hours so they have better visibility for any hazards, cliffs, etc. Because like Sean said, the fuel model where we're at is not tree timbered area. So I think in the area of Colorado or any place where you're dealing with big timber, it might be the possibility, hey, you can fly it at night, just pin it down, hold it until you get those ground resources in, whether it's crews or dozers or whatever you got.
And just a reminder, if you could tell us who you are and where you're from before you weigh in, that'd be great.
So, yeah.
Hi, I'm Ed Kleiman. I'm from Jupiter, Florida, or Missoula, Montana, whichever way you want to look at it. I think there's a lot of potential to support folks on the ground, too, with some pre-treatment for burnout operations, where you're not necessarily clearing the line of folks that are working there, but you're actually getting some work done to kind of prepare for some work that's going to be done. And I heard a lot from the Region 5 guys about using the aircraft kind of at that transition where the day shift's switching over to the night shift. And, that's probably a lot of time here in Colorado that, we've done, or that when I've been on the ground, we've done a lot of those burnout operations. And I think it would have been really, really helpful to have that sort of pre-treatment done with the aircraft rather than be kind of trying to do it from an engine from the side of a hard road or some other sort of road where that operation was difficult. So.
So, Scott, you're ops on a Type 2 team, right? Listening in on the discussion. I think, Gikla hit it on the head over there that, that's kind of been the paradigm for a while, is we're not putting a lot of boots on the ground at night on a lot of these fires. And as an ops chief, can I pick on you, Scott? I mean, what do you think? What would you see as far as some future discussions about staffing up to support some night ops out there with aerial firefighting? If you don't mind, sir.
Well, since you already introduced me, but I think it's going to be anything, just like anything, when you're talking about risk, you're going to have to look at that and look at the consequences. And what is that going to mean? I mean, you heard in the Angeles sitting there, like when they have the brush, they don't have the timber, as much. What does that mean? So I think if you're talking about the night operations on that, I think this is a nice starting point for you guys to do some due diligence to see if it is going to be viable and exactly what does that mean. So I think this might be a starting point to start evaluating some of that kind of stuff, because like if you're looking at the one gentleman, I believe from LA, when he was saying that it is a risk, and it is a lot riskier than what you're doing during the day. So then what you need to look at that kind of stuff is the consequence to that risk. And so it's going to be, following those same processes and stuff with the Type 2 team. I think some of the UAS stuff definitely is going to be something that I think could be a starting point as well, to take a look at on the unmanned with potentially, and they're starting to do that in with some of the IMTs already, if you saw what they were doing up on TP Springs and a few other places. So I think that could be a viable starting point as well.
One thing that seems like maybe an opportunity here is I'm curious myself as to the effectiveness of drop at night and whether maybe if you do some drops at night, they'll hold a little better. Again, to kind of buy that time somebody's talking about for the crews to come in the next day, slow things down. It may be an interesting experiment to do some experimental drops at night where we use the MMA to measure that hold time, to see how effective that drop is at night and see if it holds longer and gives us that opportunity to buy time to the next day.
So Bob and Mr. Gickler and others, I'll tell you, as an old Type 2 IC.
Who are you, sir?
Todd Richardson, Fred Flintstone. One of the most frustrating things that happened in the last decade was the abandonment of night ops. And part of it was that we don't have the number of people to do things. But I will tell you this, is that in some of the other arenas, in the wildland fire use world and stuff, we were trying to apply fire and water at night. And we found huge successes in it, but we had huge internal resistance due to our culture. We do risk, and there's no acceptable risk if, as Scott said, if we have bad outcomes potentially. But if we stop abandoning a practice that is known, we know RH recoveries are effective, we know water is tenfold more successful at night, we know what a fire does at night, and for us to continue to think that we do have to have people around certain places for that water and that RH to be successful, I challenge people to get away from that train of thought. I think we should start looking at how science works at that time and how maybe these things can deliver things so we don't have to put people up there during the day also. There's other ways to have that perspective. And any of us that have lived, you guys have it in Cali, we have one here in the back, our backyard. Someone said, what if we could have run that thing at night on South Canyon? If I don't rhetorically visit those things as a fire manager, then I'm never going to change the way we do business. So I think, Rick, it's a real solid question, but I think we got to come up with better ways of answering those questions legitimately.
Thanks, Todd. Anyone else? So, Melissa, what was any other unanswered questions after the last couple of days? Or we can continue the conversation here. Here, I'll just throw you the mic.
Brad Keckers with DOI. You know, what I look at when I'm looking at the unmanned systems is what gaps do we have? And what gaps do we have in coverage right now? So, you know, in all the fires I've been on in my career, when you look at places, Canyon Country, Colorado, Idaho, we get these wicked inversions, and I've been squawked at by many a division and ops chief, where's my stuff, because they need supplies. One of the gaps we can fill now is their cargo role. And so the question is, you know, how big a demand is there out for that, for delivering cargo at those times where we can't currently deliver it? It's an outstanding question, but I know at least anecdotally that there are times where we're not able to support folks with supplies that they need to continue their work. Nighttime, obviously we don't fight fire at night for sometimes a lot of good reasons, sometimes not such good reasons, but to have the ability to support troops, whether it's manned or unmanned, at night does beg the question, do we need to reevaluate, can we safely put somebody out on the landscape? Maybe we can't, but if we don't because they don't have air support, they don't have a method of extraction, those are things that can be overcome with different types of systems.
Mike?
Mike Morgan, Fire Chief, Colorado River Fire Rescue. I just want to applaud Todd and agree with your comments up there, Todd. I think you're absolutely right. We have to find ways that we can instead of looking at ways we won't or we can't. And we have to continue to do the research. We have to find new ways. We know historically, we can look in the mirror and we can look back through these things and we can see when we're killing firefighters by time of day, by what's going on, and we've got to figure out ways to work around that. So I think we have to have a paradigm shift in the fire service, and I think the Center of Excellence is the place that's going to make it happen.
All right, so where am I at here? Man, if I trip, this is going to be really hilarious. Oh, yeah. And that middle finger is for what?
Yeah. David Blair, Grand Valley Fire here, just down the road in Parachute. One thing that I haven't heard that we use quite a bit here in western Colorado is seats. And I can see that seats may be useful, especially in line construction during night if we're using the buckets around this area for pinpoint stuff. But I haven't heard any talk about using seats and that kind of stuff, the air tractor 802s and such.
Anybody want to take that one on? Chief Blair, appreciate it. You know, that's, I guess, kind of why we're here, Dave, is to kind of look at what folks are really doing out there. You know, we've kind of focused on a lot of rotor wing stuff. We've got some air tanker guys here. We've got some unmanned systems guys here. As Kim put it, it's, you know, it's kind of a nice place to come and check out a lot of different stuff that's going on. But, yeah, that's maybe one of the things we'll have to look at, David. All right.
And I'll just say that wasn't intentional. We didn't not reach out to the single engine air tanker companies. We're looking to you guys to really get the word out about what we're doing here. So next time we have an event like this, you say, hey, you know, last time I was there, I met this person, or you should have been at this because you would have really benefited from the information or from sharing the information that you have. So, you know, this is our first big event, and we thank you for being a part of it, but we hope that you'll go out and tell all the people you know, next time the Center of Excellence has an event, you need to be there.
Kim Harris with ASU. I kind of alluded when you talk about the seats there, when I was talking about the ag aircraft, because that's Bruce Hubler, the one guy we've got up doing ag now, is running those aircraft. And we're fully convinced that you could easily, I won't say easily, that you could apply the same techniques that they're talking about for the air tankers into a seats aircraft for flying at night. They'll work equally as well. In some ways, they have better performance for the terrain, and so they can they get lower and work and still do everything. So I see no reason why not to do that and expand the operation, and that might be the next step. As far as a trial with, is like the Forest Service has done with the Helicopter Express, maybe a single seat machine someplace and work the same terrain.
And we do have some seat operators here too, right?
Kyle Scott, and I guess that's where I'm from. It all started with mom and dad in the back seat of a Buick, but that's the long story. I'm from Fort Morgan, and we have a couple of 802 seats. My question kind of for Kim is, what do you think is more complex, helicopter NVG operations or like a seat fixed wing? Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to answer for you, Kim, but you know, there are 802s out there in the world that are NVG converted that are used as a close air support platform in a special operations role. Columbia's using them, Jordan's using them, and a couple other folks out there. So it's being done. It's just not putting water on targets. It's lead. I could speak to that a little bit. 3 of our pilots have come out. 2 of them have come out of the military. All 3 of them have worked in Mid-East with the 802Us. but their NVG operations are all at 10,000 feet.
So Kim, were you going to weigh in on that?
Yeah, you're going back to your original question of more complex. I don't know that you can say one is more complex than the other. They're equally complex. I think the fixed wing have got, because you're flying, the profiles are longer, straighter lines and a little less turning, that they lend themselves to an EVS system as well as goggles. And so then, because helicopters we can turn and really maneuver around the smoke largely. Airplanes have a tougher time doing that, and at night I think the risk of a CFIT with the smoke is a real risk. But I think if you pair the NVGs with an EVS system, so that you've got a good terrain picture, or at least a good TAWS. But I would lean towards EVS. I think it's a good pair. You can't use just that. I think you have to be able to see. But seats with an EVS and NVGs, I think, could do a lot of work and cover a lot of ground, you know, because of the speed of those things. It's, unfortunately, you need a long, flat, straight, reasonably long, flat, straight place to tank, but you've got a lot of flexibility. So I think there's a real market or a real place in the whole thing with that kind of a that kind of a tool.
All right, thank you. All right, well, we've kind of gone from, posing that initial question. Rick, thanks for getting us started there. Really, one of the big challenges is thinking about what we can do to staff up. And actually, I agree with Rick. How do you go out there and support this stuff with boots on the ground? That's going to be a challenge. All the way around to thinking about how we might integrate some single-engine air tankers and some of the other technology with that. And then the other thing, too, that I think I'm really capturing, you guys, is that some of this, as Sean alluded to here, it's a practice that's been proven to be successful down in Southern California, Michael and those guys, LA County, Ventura County, on and on. But it is somewhat, seems to be enabled a little bit by some of the fuel types down there, the brush versus tall timber. So I think that's great, Melissa. It's something to take under consideration. All right, thanks, guys. What's next, Melissa?
Does anybody else have any other questions they'd like to pose before we move on? All right, and I'm actually going to go off the beaten path a little, because our next question was sort of, what do you see as the biggest challenge to us implementing a night operations program? But taking the lead from some of the leaders in this room, from Chief Morgan and Todd Richardson, is, we shouldn't be focused on what the challenges are necessarily. We should be focusing on what the solutions are and how we overcome some of those challenges. So instead of asking why, what do you think the biggest challenge is? Do you think it's safety? Do you think it's policy? Do you think it's convincing people that it's something we should be doing? I'm going to ask, what do you see as the most important next step that we take in Colorado to implement a night operations program?
I'm working on it.
Vaughn Jones with the state of Colorado. I guess trying to think it through, Melissa, it seems to me obviously the first step would be to identify and quantify the need, because that's going to determine which tools we might be looking at, and then the solutions to make those happen. So I'm more wildfire, look at some of the other EMS, all risk, is that part of it or not? And what kind of resource, and then go from there. So, that's why you have, I think, hopefully some really smart people working for you that can help us with that.
Yeah, thanks, Vaughn. Michael?
I agree with that statement about the quantifying of the need, and then sort of the multi-use of the resource. So in other words, like, for example, the state of California has CAL FIRE, and they have 10 aircraft positioned throughout the state. Right now, they are not a nighttime operation, but they're considering a nighttime and rescue operation. So you could say that they're kind of their building block method would be the establishment of a state-level aviation resource and what its mission is going to be. And then the natural progression then would go on to the more advanced stuff, like obviously the night portion of it. But the foundation to it is the aircraft, the need, the aircraft, the equipment of the aircraft, and then the progression to the night side of things, if it's going to be a state-level resource. And of course, they use UH-1s. They're looking at an upgraded aircraft that looks like they might be going to the EPI 412 because they want a multi-engine aircraft for the purposes of flying at night. That was one of their requirements. A Type 2 might not be a usable piece of equipment because of the type of fuel that you have on it. It's just not going to be an effective tool. Or you could buy a fleet of 100. I'm sure Bell would be happy about that. But so that ground level analysis of the need really is really the foundation to everything, I believe.
Thanks, Michael.
Rocco Snar from the Division of Fire Prevention and Control. One common theme I've heard the last couple of days is, how much time agencies are spending with currency with all of their folks. In effort to get, or in an attempt to get to currency, you have to expand into all hazard stuff. And statutorily, we're not in the place in Colorado where I think, we may need to have some of that shorn up if we choose to go down this road, try to implement people on a 365-day a year, 7 days week schedule. We're able to do it with the multi-mission aircraft, but we still have to fly in terrible weather or in cold conditions to keep our MSOs current. So if we're going to go down that road and we want to hire great people and keep them current, I think there's some other legal legwork probably that needs to happen for us.
Okay, thanks, Rocco. Anybody else?
Dave, one thing I would like to add is that we as federal partners are sometimes, you've heard this, please, I am one, that sometimes we need to be ran over the top of ourselves because federal policy does, for some reason or another, exist that limits us from things and possible litigations or possible, gotcha. I can see our partners in the Guard over there. We tried to get a helicopter on the Mountain Fly families, right, during South Canyon. It had to go all the way to Secretary, right? Right. But we have state partners that can do things that we can't federally, and I really challenge us, Melissa, to do just like we're talking about all the other things when it comes to what's coming out of your shop, is don't let your partners' inhibiting policies become a hurdle for what could happen legislatively in Colorado. And I hear that, and if you listen to that theme from California, whether it was the LA folks or the Ventura folks or whomever it might have been, there were people that were smart enough to step aside and let those that could be successful, and then we could get into their slipstream sooner on. And I think that's one of the things that I would hope comes out of your shop is you have the tools and the voice to do things that unfortunately our bureaucracies don't help with, but then we can employ the Brads from DOI, we can employ Jeff and those others from other places at another level in the federal. And if you can continue to drive us, I would say that would be a huge thing from a federal perspective that you could do with your mechanisms.
Thanks, Todd. All right, some good discussion.
So I'd like to pose the question to those who are currently involved in night operations. What would you say is the biggest surprise that you encountered? Like, Richie, you said you had sort of a short time frame to get everything up and running. So what obstacles are we going to run into that we can prepare for in advance, that we can learn from maybe the lessons that you guys had to learn on the ground?
Richie Kittrell, Helicopter Express. I'll tell you, the number one was time frame. You can't try to compress what typically would be 24 months worth of work down into 3 and expect everything to go right. So it's not something that, if you guys started right now and wanted to be operational on a night helicopter firefighting contract by this fire season, you'd be putting yourself at a big disadvantage. So you're looking now to be fighting fire in 2017. So that's one of the big things. And that's federal bureaucracy as well. That's why we had 90 days to get ready, because of all the stuff they have to do. So maybe, hopefully you guys could have a little more flexibility, but that's going to be your big one. And the learning curve. It'd be nice to get somebody, if you're going to do it, you've got to have enough guys that are involved, that have done it before, or you get the right people. Like, if it hadn't been for ASU, we'd have been sunk. You know, you've got to get the right team of people to do this, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Yeah, from the unmanned standpoint, never underestimate the ability of the FAA to surprise you. So we've had lots and lots and lots of surprises every time we go out to do some sort of a mission. If you're going to engage in that realm, just like Richie said, it's a multi-year process. I mean, we've been at it for 10 years now, slowly, incrementally growing the unmanned aircraft program, and we're still in our infancy when it comes to the fire game. The second is never underestimate the ability of a local manager to ask all the same questions that you get asked at the national level. People don't understand that technology. They're suspicious. They're concerned. They want to manage risk, rightfully so. You have to be willing to answer those questions over and over and over and over again, because they will be posed from all levels.
Hang on, Paul. Go to Darlene here real quick.
Darlene Hall, Forest Aviation Office of the Angeles. The biggest thing from my perspective is staffing. One, on 24-hour versus nighttime capability, what is that? Second is, we're different than LA County. They send an engine out, and an engine module loads the helicopter. I send a crew out. So you need to determine how you're going to make that work. Are you going to send a crew with the aircraft, with the equipment, or are you going to have a module show up on scene and stuff? Definitely the staffing, and then when you work with the helicopter, is it 24-hour, 12-hour, 10-hour? What are you going to do to staff it to make it work? That's the biggest issue, is staffing I have.
Thank you. Paul Lindsay?
Paul Lindsay, Forest Service Aviation Management. Two things. One kind of ties to what Darlene said, staffing, but that means money. And throughout the night Air Ops program, we underestimated what it's going to cost, and we're not done spending that money, and we're not done refining the program either. What it looks like 5 years from now will probably be different, and what it takes to get us there will be money, and that's in people, it's in aircraft, it's in oversight, additional positions at the region, like Sean's position was an addition to that, dispatchers, air tax like RICO. It almost seems never ending. The other piece was, I wasn't an advocate of air attack when it first came up, and this was before we even started the program, but it didn't take long in the LA basin to figure out that it was important, and I'm even more of an advocate now. I think no matter where you do night helicopter or fixed wing ops, you need somebody up above paying attention, completing that loop back to the boots on the ground with some IR, EO technology, just making sure you've got quality assurance on what's going on. Those are two lessons I thought of.
Fantastic. Thanks, Paul. Anybody else? Did you have a comment, Clark? Okay. I'm picking on you, but.
Yeah, that's okay. So Clark Hammond, BLM Colorado State Aviation Manager. I wanted to circle back to the 802 conversation and night ops. I think we have to be smart to look at the right tool for the right job. The 802 was designed for initial attack. I've been ATGS for 15 years, Air Operations Branch Director. Large fire, that isn't where that tool was built to be. Truly isn't. I worked with them aircraft for years where me and Jason came out of. We relied on them solely. They are effective in tandem or triple and threes. But for large fire or night ops, me as an air operations branch director looking at the risk versus benefit, the benefit I don't see is there. That's just my opinion. Nighttime, I don't know. Daytime, rapid initial attack, that's what that tool was built for. My 2 cents.
Fantastic, thank you. We wouldn't want to overlook the opportunity to involve some of the Air Ops branch directors in the audience here, folks. That's going to be integral, as folks had talked about the integration with the UAS program, in fact, with getting tied in with the teams and how they look at integrating these technologies and, in some cases, night operations. So thanks, Clark. Anybody else? All right, Melissa, back to you. Oh, you got one? All right, Lonnie. I'm on my way.
Yeah, I'm Lonnie Leslie with Lawn Air. I've been flying the air attack platform in Southern California. And most of this conference has been with NVGs flying at night. But we have a little different situation with the fixed wing where we rely on infrared cameras. So we don't use any night vision goggles. We're not maneuvering as low, but we're down in the canyons and in the dark. The thing that surprised me first using the IR at night is that forest fires put up smoke during the night. You can't see them with an IR camera, but you can fly right into the column and never even know it's there until you're in it. So it's, the right tool for the job. At the NVGs, at least you can see the smoke at night. If you get to relying on IR cameras, like on an 802 or something, maybe using IR instead of NVGs at night, then you can see a lot, but you can't see the smoke column until you're in it.
All right, thanks, Lonnie. Anything else, you guys?
So I kind of heard a theme of staffing needs, training. What types of training should we be focused on? We're trying to pair with some of the higher education institutes. We're here at Colorado Mountain College. What types of shortages are you seeing as far as, some of it's financial, do we have enough money? But some of it is just, are we training people with the right skill set to be involved in these types of operations? So does anybody want to weigh in on that? Where are the pilots, ground crews, where are the shortages as far as qualifications for us to do this safely and effectively?
Yeah, you could talk a little bit about the unmanned stuff, Brad? Where are we going with that?
So right now in the unmanned side, as far as integrating into fire, we have a total lack of qualifications for folks on the ground. So we're relying on existing aviation managers, AOBD, ASGS, helicopter manager types to oversee those limited operations. But until we have, as we're chartered to do with our subcommittee group, an operations guide, which is going to include position task books, prerequisite training, all of that stuff in place. That's what it's going to take ultimately to be fully integrated, so those people understand not only how to use the tool tactically, but how to make sure it's a safe thing for everybody else that's out there on the fire.
Okay, thank you. Amy?
Thank you. Again, Amy Baldoff, aircraft coordinator at the Rocky Mountain Area Coordination Center. And in regards to staffing, we do have some qualified aircraft dispatchers, obviously, for our daytime ops. And there are some trainees. However, we need more. We're definitely going to have to boost that staffing if it does go tonight. But also, with our qualified aircraft dispatchers, we need to have annual workshops and refreshers, because they could be qualified, but they don't necessarily have several years of experience or knowledge. They haven't gained all that yet. And we definitely need to have, like I said, more refreshers and workshops to make our dispatchers better than they already are.
So yeah, that's right. You know, one of the connections I would see again, Melissa, just speaking for myself and Clark, Todd, some of you guys, Clay, you know, one of the things that's going to be integral with this is it's just like the multi-mission aircraft program. I mean, we've gone out on a number of road shows, and you're talking about education. We've been doing road shows for a long time, talking about what that technology brings to the fight. Paul Lindsay, I know you're interested in some, what's the word, surge capacity. Thanks, Paul. And how that might fit into looking at some of that. And where I'm going with this, Clay, you guys, is that I think that's one of the things that's sort of on us, Melissa, and Rocco, is to continue to bring, you know, that education forth on what that tool can do. But, you know, in the large extent of looking at night ops, if we ever go down that road, we need to figure out a way to start introducing that in terms of what that means. And again, it all comes back to cost benefit or risk benefit, all that kind of stuff. How we go about introducing that and getting folks involved in the discussion is going to be really critical, I think, going forward. But anybody else?
If anybody knows the answer, I guess I should probably know. But if you don't have any Canadian representative, is there any night ops going on with any Canadian agencies, or are they doing? Have they looked into it or done it or tried it?
I can't speak authoritatively, but we've worked with a couple operators up there that do fight fire, and they are not doing any night firefighting, even though they have a night fire, an NVG modified aircraft. They've tried to sell it to Canada. There's a lot of interest, but they're fighting the same cultural battle, I guess, of everybody saying, well, we've done it this way for a long time, and you know, in the United States, everybody, there's no Type 1s that are doing it other than LA County, and so they're just very reluctant. There's an interest, but they're trying to push a rope uphill still, and I think that's what we see with a lot of different things. It's new technology, and it's not like we're being ineffective with our current technology, right, and techniques. So what we're trying to do is push the envelope, get something better, faster, more effective, safer, and we've gotten so good at what we do that you're pushing the rope uphill a little bit, because everybody's they're comfortable, right? We've got to push everybody out of that comfort zone, but we have to do it in a way that makes sense. We don't want to. Doesn't make sense to push out into something that isn't effective or isn't safe just because it's new, and that's probably the biggest thing. And that's like with the seed aircraft and initial attack. You know, one of my questions is, why don't we do initial attack at night? Is that a question that needs to be asked? Just because we've never done it, is that a reason not to do it? I talked to a manager down in Australia that are using seed, and his policy in his area there is any smoke that's reported is an automatic launch for a seed aircraft, and then that aircraft gets on, can do the initial attack, but also can report back very quickly as to what's going on. And his next step is a data link, so that they can go in and see. So it's not only what the pilot's seen, but they can have a real picture, and then that manager can say, oh, we've got 3 engines going, we need another 2, or we can turn around all of them except 1, or whatever. And so I think there's a role there for that initial attack, and that's what I'm talking about, coming out of this box of how we deal with things, because maybe there's some other boxes we can get into, I guess.
All right, thank you. Anybody else?
All right, so the last question I want to ask is a little bit selfish because it doesn't have to do with night operations. You've heard our mission, you've seen what we're here to do as far as innovative new technologies and keeping Colorado on the forefront of those in wildland fire. What else should the Center of Excellence be researching, in your opinion? Nothing? We're doing it all? We're doing everything right? What else should we be looking into as the Center of Excellence to stay on the cutting edge of new technologies?
I'm Colonel Smoji. I'm the commander at the High Altitude Training Site. If you focus on just technology, you're going to be a gee-whiz organization. That's always going to be looked to as, well, if we wanted to explore that technology, we would go to this organization. Some other things you guys ought to be looking at is being a repository for knowledge. Whether any of this MVG stuff ever gets off the ground in Colorado should be a moot point in your mind. What you should do is package that information, so if Idaho wants to do it or Montana wants to do it, where are they going to look to gather that information? They should come back to Rifle, Colorado to get that information. You ought to look at tactics and feeding strategies. There's stuff out there that the line fireman is using that if you could package that information and not hoard it, and what works great in LA may not be what works great in Colorado, but if you could package that information and put it out there, then you're going to be the knowledge repository for information too. So don't just focus on the technology and the latest gee-whiz stuff, because that's going to pigeonhole you. You should look at being the repository and the go-to organization for tactics, strategies, knowledge. If I wanted to set up a goggle program, I should take what the Center of Excellence has packaged and then apply that to my local area in Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, wherever they want to go. And at least it would give them the tools to start that process.
And just to comment on that, that's one of our legislative mandates, is that we are to be an integrated repository for this type of information. So here we're sort of focused on this new technology, and that's what we want to hear back from you. But absolutely, we need to keep in mind that that's our bread and butter. Is we don't want to be sort of out the door, the next big thing. We want to actually be doing meaningful work for the folks on the ground. So thanks.
Anyone else want to weigh in on that question? All right. What else, Melissa?
Any final comments? We're not going to make you talk, so.
Well done. Nice job. Bob, did you have something you wanted to add?
No, I just wanted to say, well
Oh.
done here, good presentation, nice facility.
Thanks, Bob. We appreciate that. Hey, guys, that was kind of where we were at with trying to get the roundtable discussion going. I thought those were some good questions. I hope you'll maybe think about what we've done here over the last couple of days. Maybe think about keeping those questions a little fresh in your mind for a couple of days after you go back. If you think of something related to those, or really connected to anything that we did here with the summit, I guess, Melissa, I would encourage these guys to email us. A lot of you guys have been in contact with either me or Melissa and Bob, in some cases, vendors, that kind of thing. Man, we appreciate you guys taking a look at that survey. That's really important for us. Kim McFan put a lot of work into that, helping us kind of think about, what are the critical things we want to get back from you in terms of evaluating our success here. So that's really a critical element of what we did. But, man, I just want to thank you guys for your interaction and participating in the discussion here this morning. Melissa?
Great. Oh, Darlene, did you have another comment?
Provide like an email list of everyone who attended in case a question pops up and we want to pose it to someone who's attended here. We don't have a business card or anything. You look at something like that.
Email list of,
yeah, well, I'd
participants?
encourage you to just send that to us, and if it is something we need to blast out, we didn't get approval from everybody to sort of share that info, so I don't want to step on anybody's toes privacy-wise, but if you want to send that to us, we'd be more than glad to blast out some final questions. Connect people.
Okay.
All right, so I just want to say thank you all so much for your participation. I'd like to just give one final round of applause to our vendors, to Colorado Mountain College, our local supporters, and our speakers here. So thank you all so much. So we're all done here. We encourage you to go have lunch in our lovely little town before you head out. If you're interested, anytime you're driving by on I-70, stop by the airport and see us. We'd love to have you and show you around. We will keep you posted on our next steps. We want you to be involved in what's next for Colorado in nighttime firefighting operations. So thank you all. Please take your trash out, and we'll see you at the next event.